10 years and 2 administrations ago, I was honored to gavel in the first hearing on this legislation. Today, I'm honored to gavel in this hearing as chair of the committee. It was 20 years ago, that I first introduced the DREAM Act with the chair of the committee at the time, Republican Senator Orrin Hatch. Senator Hatch said it was his idea. There was some dispute over that, but since he was in the majority, I deferred to him as the lead sponsor of the first DREAM Act. Our stories about the DREAM Act have touched the hearts of Americans. The phrase itself, dreamers, which was not identified early on with this cause, has now become common parlance. We revel in the stories of those who are affected by the DREAM Act and Daca because they are the stories of America and our history of immigration. Before we get started, I'd like to ask my colleagues to join me in viewing a video on this issue.
When I was 14 years old, I was brought to the U.S. to escape the increasingly erratic political climate in Nigeria.
Although I did not make the choice to come to America, this country quickly became my home.
For me, everything I've ever known is in Las Vegas.
I enlisted in the United States Army.
I graduated with a chemical engineering degree.
In Afghanistan, I fought side by side with my Army brothers. It mattered more that we were willing to die for each other and for our country than where we came from.
They gave up everything they knew to come to this country for us, for their children.
I excelled and I thought that I was just like my classmates until the time came to apply for colleges. My guidance counselors then told me that it was the end of the road for my academic career.
Even though I had a STEM degree and there were jobs available, no one would hire me in this field because I didn't have legal status.
It's been nearly 10 years since graduation, and I'm yet to work a day as an engineer.
In an effort to get right with the law, my dad had paid a notario to file an immigration application. We were taken advantage of. While she was doing this, she was draining our life savings.
I was awakened with a police officer by my bed, being rounded up around our dining room table. The same table that every week my family would sit around to read the Bible.
The only thing worse than having your dreams dashed or being rejected by my own country is losing my father and not being able to say goodbye.
You're not attacking a stranger. You're attacking the girl who sits next to your grandson in chemistry class.
Too many young people like me are carrying burdens that we were never meant to carry.
There are people that, like my family, are only making our country a better place. They volunteer in our communities, they go to church with us, they go to school with us.
I don't believe that I'm entitled to anything more than this great nation has taught me, that we all have a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
We as dreamers have something to offer to the country we always considered our home.
Through the love that we have for this country, through the love that we have and that our pastors and faith leaders are providing, we're going to finally, through love, see justice.
My name is Oscar Vasquez, and I am proud to be an American.
It was 9 years ago today when President Obama walked into the Rose Garden and announced a new policy that would change the lives of hundreds of thousands of young people in our country. It is called Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, better known as DACA. DACA allows young immigrants who arrived in America as children to safely remain in the only home they've ever known. If they register with the government, pay a substantial fee, clear criminal and national security background checks, then they can receive temporary renewable protection from deportation. Since 2012, more than 800,000 Dreamers have stepped out of the shadows to enroll in DACA. The program has been a life changer. It has allowed them to work, pursue higher education, and serve in America's military. DACA has unleashed the full potential of Dreamers. August 15th, 2012 is a date I will never forget. It was the first day that DACA applications were accepted. I was at Navy Pier in Chicago for a workshop to help Dreamers apply for DACA. We weren't sure if anyone would show up, then we weren't sure how many would show up, and then what happened astonished us. Thousands of young people showed up on that day, filled the entire boardwalk. Some gathered with their parents at midnight before the actual opening that morning. Some drove in from neighboring states. That's how eager these young people were to officially become part of America, even if on a temporary renewable basis. And that's what's really the key word when it comes to DACA. It's temporary. When President Obama first announced it, he said, because this is temporary, Congress needs to act. There's still time for Congress to pass the DREAM Act this year, he said, because these kids deserve to plan their lives in more than 2-year increments. Well, that year has turned into 9 years. Over the years, the DREAM Act has been a victim of a filibuster on the floor of the Senate 5 different times. As the DREAM Act has languished in the Senate, hundreds of thousands of young people have been left with their futures in doubt. But that hasn't stopped them from fighting for their dreams and giving everything they can to this country. It has been my honor to be the voice of the Dreamers for 20 years. They have been an inspiration. I've had the privilege of sharing over 125 of their personal stories on the Senate floor. The posters, colored photographs that you see around you represent just a small fraction of the stories that I've told. Dreamers have taught children in our nation's classrooms, dazzled audiences at world-class music venues like Carnegie Hall, fought in American wars, and have started American businesses. During the past year, as our nation was ravaged by a pandemic, and we were cheering on the healthcare heroes who risked their lives for us every minute of every day, Dreamers were saving American lives. According to the classification used by President Trump, more than 200,000 DACA recipients are essential, critical infrastructure workers. Among them are thousands of frontline healthcare workers, doctors, intensive care nurses, paramedics, respiratory therapists. We are lucky to be joined by one of those heroes today, Manuel Bernell Mejia, or Dr. Bernell, as I'm going to call him. First arrived in the United States at the age of 2, grew up in Memphis, Tennessee, graduated at the top of his class in high school, and developed a passion for medicine. That passion led him to my home state of Illinois, where he enrolled in the very first medical school in the nation to admit DACA recipients, Loyola University Chicago's Stritch School of Medicine. Today, Dr. Bernell has taken a break from the work that he's doing in an emergency room on the south side of Chicago in one of the busiest trauma hospitals in our community. During this pandemic, Dr. Bernell has literally risked his life every day to serve our country and save lives. In 2017, the former president attempted to terminate DACA. Just imagine what it would have meant for our country if the Supreme Court had not stopped him from deporting heroes like Dr. Bernell to countries they hardly remember. The legislation we're focusing on today, the Dream and Promise Act, recognizes dreamers aren't the only immigrants with a dream. And they are far from the only people falling through the cracks of our broken system. This includes 400,000 people living in the United States under temporary protected status, TPS. Like DACA recipients, TPS recipients have saved lives during this pandemic. More than 130,000 TPS holders are essential critical infrastructure workers, including 11,600 healthcare workers. We're going to hear from one of them this morning. His name is Rony Ponthieu. I think I pronounced that close to correct. Is it? Good. Bien. And he was granted TPS after a devastating earthquake hit Haiti in 2010. He and his wife resettled in Florida, where they raised 2 children, and where Mr. Ponthieu works as a nurse in the respiratory unit of his hospital treating COVID-19 patients. After former President Trump attempted to eliminate TPS for Haiti in 2017, Mr. Ponthieu pleaded with him to, quote, help us stay in this country with peace of mind so we can save the most people possible. That is all TPS recipients like Mr. Ponthieu and dreamers like Dr. Bernell are asking for. They're not asking for a handout, but an opportunity to continue to serve and save lives in America. We need people just like them. DACA and TPS recipients and their households contribute an estimated $17.4 billion in federal taxes and $9.7 billion in state and local taxes every single year. By enacting the Dream and Promise Act, we can increase our nation's GDP by an estimated $799 billion over 10 years and create more than 285,000 new jobs. There is a mistaken notion that we have a static number of jobs in America and we all have to fight over them. We are finding that by bringing talented people in to serve this country and to create businesses, we actually have a dynamic that increases the size of employment in our economy. We need a functioning immigration system that welcomes immigrants so we can grow our economy and put America on track to be a winner in the 21st century. The challenges we face at the border are no excuse for inaction. I've spoken to Senator Cornyn and Senator Sinema about the southern border. We are not going to ignore that reality, but this is a reality as well. There is no excuse for inaction. For too many years, Congress has looked the other way and found another excuse to put off this decision. It's time to allow these individuals, these future Americans, to finally become American citizens. That's why we must join the House in passing the Dream and Promise Act. Now I recognize Senator Grassley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to all of our witnesses that will be testifying today and answering our questions. Today's hearing addresses a topic of interest to many members of Congress and Americans around the country, and it's a very important issue for me because, like you, Mr. Chairman, I've worked to find a legislative solution to addressing the Daca populations. In 2018, I did just that when I introduced the Secure and Succeed Act with several members of this committee. I know this is an issue of great importance to you, and I know that you have been leading bipartisan discussions in recent weeks to try and reach an agreement. As ranking member of this committee, I look forward to participating in those discussions moving forward. I'd like to take two brief points that I'd like to make about the ongoing debate over legal status of undocumented young people brought here as children. I start with the assumption that children brought here by their parents did not violate our laws, but their parents did by violating our laws coming to this country. First, any legislation providing legal status for those young people must include meaningful border security and immigration enforcement measures. The need for robust border security and enforcement measures has been demonstrated by the current crisis at our southern border, a crisis that is in direct result of this administration's policies. Whether it be terminating physical barrier construction at the border, severely limiting the ability of ICE to enforce our border immigration laws, or supporting sanctuary cities, the administration has actively sought to undermine border security and immigration enforcement. Therefore, it shouldn't be a surprise that last month the total encounters at the southern border were up 675% from May of 2020. For unaccompanied children, encounters were up 1,305% from last May. And for family units, it was 4,143% up. These numbers are staggering. The administration doesn't seem to be doing much about it. The president and vice president still have not even been to the border to see firsthand the problems. When the vice president was asked about it last week, her response was, and I haven't been to Europe either. Like most of this administration's responses to crisis at the border, it was truly baffling statement. If we want to provide legal status for dreamers, we must secure our border so that we don't find ourselves in the same situation again 20 or 30 years from now. Unfortunately, the administration doesn't appear to be serious about doing that, and the bills we're discussing today don't even attempt to do that. When I was at the border a couple months ago, I had the opportunity to hear the Border Patrol say to us that they had an opportunity to brief the incoming administration before the January 20th date of inauguration. and they advised the incoming administration to leave everything that was then in place. And obviously, on January the 20th, the administration took contrary action. And what do we have? We have the crisis that you see on television every day with people crossing, wading through the Rio Grande to get here. Finally, it is important that any bill providing legal status to undocumented young people, especially DACA recipients, be properly scoped. The act that we're having the hearing on and the DREAM Act fail that test in a number of ways. Highlight just a few. First, they would provide legal status to millions of illegal immigrants who have no connection at all to the DACA program, including illegal immigrants who were not even in the United States when DACA was created. In the case of the American Dream and Promise Act, the illegal immigrants need only have been in the United States since January 1st of this year in order to qualify. Second, as we will hear from some of the witnesses, these bills would allow illegal immigrants with criminal records to be eligible for legal status. That simply defies common sense. Third, they would allow illegal immigrants with a final order of removal to legalize anyway, finally. And this is finally. They don't contain a cutoff date for entrance or maximum age. As an example, it seems like I've read about a 68-year-old person entering the country illegally, and the United States illegally at the age of 17 in 1970 would qualify as a dreamer under these bills. Again, that defies common sense. All that being said, I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today and hope that we can ultimately come up with a rational and bipartisan solution because, as I said previously, people who were brought here by their parents did not violate the laws, but people that brought them here violated our laws. So I see justice being done for DACA as a legitimate thing to do. Yeah.
We have Senator Padilla has asked for recognition, and he is the he's chairman of the Judiciary Subcommittee on Immigration, Citizenship, and Border Safety. Senator Padilla.
Thank you, Senator Durbin. Colleagues, as a proud son of immigrants, I am honored to participate in this hearing and to help highlight the contributions of Dreamers and TPS recipients, contributions that they're making to this country each and every day. You know, in California, we're lucky to be home to more than 250,000 DACA and TPS recipients, the most of any state in the nation. So it's safe to say that no state has more at stake in passing a solution for these individuals than California. I want to start by thanking Senator Durbin for your tireless leadership on behalf of Dreamers. I've seen you work diligently across the aisle to build support for the DREAM Act year after year after year. As you mentioned, this marks the 20th anniversary of the first time you introduced the DREAM Act in the United States Senate. And as you referenced, we're also marking the 9th anniversary of the DACA program, an executive action by President Obama intended to provide temporary protection for undocumented young people while Congress took action on a permanent solution. The last 9 years are a testament to the passion and resilience of DACA recipients and advocates. Hundreds of dreamers have come forward to share their stories with the world, risking deportation to fight for their futures. For 4 years, Dreamers successfully opposed efforts to destroy the DACA program. They even demonstrated the unlawfulness of these efforts before the United States Supreme Court. But the past 9 years also represents a failure on the part of this body. Congress has repeatedly failed to pass a permanent solution, creating a pathway to citizenship for Dreamers and other long-term residents of our communities. DACA was enacted as a stopgap measure. It was never enough, nor intended to be enough, for the hundreds of thousands of undocumented immigrants who work, study, and have made their lives here in the United States. Over the last 20 years, DREAM Act measures have received support of bipartisan majorities in both the House and the Senate, only to be blocked by the filibuster. It's no surprise that protecting Dreamers is a bipartisan issue in Congress. In fact, overwhelming majorities of the American people, yes, Democrats, Republicans, and independents, support a path to legalization for undocumented young people. The American people recognize our urgent need to do justice by Dreamers. And still, Congress has left hundreds of thousands of young people and their families to live in limbo for years and years and years. And in that time, Dreamers have continued to make their lives in communities across America, as have TPS recipients. They've shared their intelligence, their dedication, and their skills, despite constantly living in fear of a potential change in their status. 29,000 DACA recipients and more than 11,000 TPS holders are healthcare workers, essential frontline workers during the COVID-19 pandemic. These brave individuals were able to pursue their ambitions to serve others only because of their temporary legal status. They risked their lives to care for COVID-19 patients throughout the country. And that's just in healthcare. Another more than 500,000 DACA recipients and TPS holders have held jobs in industries classified as essential, from agriculture and food service to sanitation and construction. These immigrants have put their own health and their family's health on the line to keep America running. And most DACA and TPS holders only know the United States as their home. To colleagues, it is past time for Congress to recognize that reality into law. Creating a pathway to citizenship for Dreamers and TPS holders isn't just the right thing to do, it's also key to strengthening our economy. A new report from UC Davis and the Center for American Progress finds that the American Dream and Promise Act would create hundreds of thousands of new jobs and raise wages for all American workers. Dreamers, TPS holders, and other long-term permanent residents of our country have been waiting too long for Congress to act. Lady, a DACA beneficiary who advocates on behalf of farm workers like her parents, needs our help. Patricia, a TPS beneficiary from El Salvador who works for a cleaning company in San Francisco, needs our help. Erica, a DACA beneficiary whose parents are TPS beneficiaries from El Salvador, is working as a medical assistant at a pediatric hospital in Dublin, California, and she needs our help. The names and the stories go on and on and on. The American people are calling on us to pass permanent protections for the people that they know as doctors, as teachers, as neighbors, as parents. Mr. Chair, I look forward to hearing from today's witnesses about the urgent need for a path to citizenship and the strengths that immigrants bring to our nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.
Chairman, may I just say a few words?
I'm going to first recognize Senator Cornyn, and then you'll be the next,
Thank you.
please. Chairman Padilla, thank you. As ranking member of the Subcommittee on Immigration, I'd like to allow Senator Cornyn the opportunity to make opening remarks.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate that very much. Thank you. In the 9 years since President Obama announced the Daca program, the Deferred Action on Childhood Arrivals, the young men and women whose futures it sought to secure have been sent on a high-stakes roller coaster journey. Their lives have hung in the balance of court rulings, even though they themselves did nothing wrong. They were brought here by their parents as children, and in America, we do not hold children responsible for the actions of their parents. The only way to eliminate the uncertainty caused by President Obama's likely unconstitutional action is through legislation. I say that because there's a pending court case in the Southern District of Texas challenging the legality of the DACA program that's been pending before Judge Hainan for some time now. And he could well issue a permanent injunction in joining the DACA program, causing further chaos and disruption. I have previously voted for legislation to let these young people stay multiple times over the years, but each time Congress has failed to muster the necessary support to get a bill on the President's desk. Every person in this room can tell you the bill being reviewed by this committee today will not move us any closer. In fact, the American people would like to know, I bet, that there is not a single bill that deals with the DREAM Act or the DACA recipients. In fact, the original DACA made 1.3 million young people eligible, but only 640,000 are still active today. Then there was the Secure and Succeed Act of 2018, which sought to provide a pathway to citizenship for 1.3 million DACA recipients. And unfortunately, that was not successful. And then there's the DREAM Act of 2021, sponsored by our chairman, which would extend a pathway to citizenship for 3 million migrants. And then finally, the bill that we're talking about here today, the American Dream and Promise Act, would extend a pathway to citizenship for more than 4.4 million people. But as an example of how far afield we've gotten, the American Dream and Promise Act would not just apply to those who've come to our country as children, but this would extend a pathway to citizenship to adults who've entered the United States as recently as January the 1st, 2021. This legislation, of course, goes far beyond the original DACA issued by President Obama to include TPS. What temporary protected status has to do with the DREAM Act or the DACA population is lost on me. This bill would also create a pathway to citizenship, as I said, for adults who've entered the country illegally as recently as January the 1st of 2021. To be clear, I support DACA recipients because they were brought here at a young age through no fault of their own, and they know no other country. But the American Dream and Promise Act has completely abandoned the justification in favor of rewarding very recent illegal entries a pathway to citizenship and further incentivizing other migrants who may want to illegally immigrate to the United States, contributing to the flood of humanity that we are seeing at our border now that the President refuses to acknowledge as the crisis that it is. Radical policies that reward illegal immigration will not pass the Senate, and it's unfair to the DACA recipients to tie their fate to such ill-considered legislation. If our Democratic colleagues are truly interested in passing legislation on DACA, especially the 640,000 active DACA recipients, a clean, bipartisan bill is the only path forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Cornyn. Senator Feinstein?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to begin by thanking you for really your tireless efforts over 2 decades to pass the DREAM Act. I also want to say that I really believe now this bill will pass. I think people are beginning to realize certain facts. This bill can secure a better future for millions of people who live in a lot of uncertainty about their place in our country, really through no fault of their own. Let me just put a few facts in the record. According to the Migration Policy Institute, there are nearly 198,000 Daca recipients in California. That's more than any other state. They pay $2 billion in federal taxes and nearly $1 billion in state and local taxes every year. Nationwide, 80% of them are working or in school. And in California, 8,600 are medical workers who have been on the front line of the pandemic. Like Dreamers, TPS recipients have established deep roots through many American communities. On average, TPS recruits have lived in the United States for nearly 20 years. In California alone, Mr. Chairman, they contribute $446.6 million in federal taxes and $237 million in state and local taxes. These are our colleagues, our neighbors, our friends, and they should not have to live in fear that they could be deported if a future administration ends TPS or a court strikes down DACA. So I'm very proud to be one of your co-sponsors, and I want to thank you for 20 years of service in bringing this legislation, I hope, finally to passage.
Thank you, Senator Feinstein. You're more than a co-sponsor. You have been a steadfast ally in this effort, and I thank you for the kind words that you expressed this morning. We have 5 witnesses who are going to testify about the Dream and Promise Act. I'm going to introduce the majority witnesses, and then I'm going to turn to Senator Grassley to introduce his. Our first witness is Dr. Manuel Bernell Mejia, third-year emergency medicine resident at Advocate Christ Medical Center in Chicago. That is his photograph taken at an earlier time. Thank you. The Honorable Leon Rodriguez served as Director of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, or USCIS, from 2014 to 2017. Prior to that, he served in civil rights leadership posts in the Obama administration and worked as a federal and state prosecutor, currently a partner at Cypher Shaw law firm. And then our third witness is Mr. Roni Pontieu, serves as a registered nurse at Jackson Memorial Hospital in Miami Gardens, Florida. Ranking Member Grassley, would you like to introduce your witnesses?
Yeah. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing Ms. Michelle Root. Michelle's daughter, Sarah Root, was killed by an illegal immigrant drunk driver in Omaha, Nebraska on January 31st, 2016. Sarah, a native of Iowa, had just graduated from college with a 4.0 GPA hours just before she was killed. Sarah's killer fled the country within 3 days after making bail. The Obama administration's U.S. Customs and Immigration Enforcement refused to place a detainer on him despite repeated outreach from the Omaha Police Department requesting that they do so. He remains at large to this very day. I've known Michelle for a number of years, and I'm a proud co-sponsor of Sarah's Law, which would require ICE to detain illegal immigrants who have been charged with a crime that resulted in death or serious bodily injury of another person. Michelle has previously testified in Congress regarding the same Sarah's tragic death. Her testimony at this hearing will highlight the importance of making sure that we don't offer legal status to illegal immigrants with a criminal record. I just don't understand the opposition to such a simple bill to bring justice to the injustice of the lack of prosecution of crimes like Sarah's death. We thank Durbin very much for his leadership in this area. We also thank somebody like Michelle for her constant fight for justice for her daughter. I also am introducing Mr. Joseph Enlow. Mr. Enlow is founder of the Enlow Group. He served as Deputy Director for Policy at U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, and in that role served as Acting Director of the agency from February 2020, January 2021. Prior to that, he served as Chief Counsel of USCIS from July 2019 to February 2020, after serving as Deputy Assistant Attorney General at the Department of Justice from June 2018 to July 2019. Prior to joining the executive branch, Mr. Enlow served as legal counsel in the office of Congressman Raul Labrador and as a counsel to the House Judiciary Committee, Subcommittee on Immigration and Border Security. He began his career in federal service in Baltimore, where he spent almost 7 years as an assistant chief counsel with with ICE, litigating before the U.S. immigration courts. Mr. Enlow received his undergraduate degree at Brandeis University in Waltham, Massachusetts, and a JD degree, Case Western Reserve University School of Law, Cleveland, Ohio. I welcome both witnesses and all witnesses.
Thanks, Senator Grassley. And the procedure will be well known to the members, but I'll repeat it for our guests. After we swear in the witnesses, each witness will be given 5 minutes to provide opening statements. There will be a round of questions with each senator having 5 minutes, and I ask them to please do their best to remain within the allotted time. So we'll start with administration of the oath. Would all of the witnesses please stand? Raise your right hand. Do you affirm the testimony you're about to give before the committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record reflect that the witnesses all responded in the affirmative. They'll each be given an opportunity for opening statements. Then I will ask a round of questions and invite Senator Padilla to come up and chair the remainder of the hearing. As chairman of the Immigration Subcommittee, we've done this as a joint hearing for the full committee and subcommittee. So thank you. Dr. Bernell, please proceed with your opening statement.
Good morning, Senators. My name is Dr. Manuel Bernell Mejia. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my journey of becoming an emergency medicine physician as an undocumented individual. First, I want to make sure to thank Chair Durbin and Ranking Member Senator Grassley, as well as Senator Graham for introducing the DREAM Act with Senator Durbin. I would also be remiss if I also did not thank Senator Blackburn for her service to my home state of Tennessee. It is an honor to be with you all and share a bit of my story. Also, I want to recognize my sister, Jasmine Bernal, who is here with me today to share this special moment. My mother was 24 and my father was 27 when they made the difficult decision to leave everything known to them to come to the United States in search of a better life for their 2-year-old son. Little did they know their decision would lead to my career as an emergency medicine doctor. Day after day, I provide critical care to save American lives on the front lines of the pandemic, even as my own future in this country remains uncertain. My memories of my birth country are shaped only by family pictures that were shown to me as a child. To be honest, the United States is the only home that I know. Home is the beautiful state of Tennessee, where I grew up and had quite the average upbringing as a kid. As a kid, I was enrolled in way too many extracurriculars, from karate to swim team, all while living in blissful ignorance of the gravity of what it meant to be undocumented. It was not until I first attempted to obtain a driver's permit that I started to grasp the extent of the many barriers I would face as an undocumented person. Nonetheless, I forged ahead, diving deeper into my studies to distract myself from what my undocumented status might mean for my future. I'm proud to tell you that I was one of 36 individuals accepted to the University Honors Program at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga, where I eventually graduated summa cum laude. I developed an appreciation for the medical profession early on when I witnessed the compassionate care a loved one received at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. This transformative experience served as my first true exposure to the field of medicine and helped me embrace the idea that my unique skill sets and talents could be best utilized delivering medical care to others. In college, and later on as a medical student, I realized that a career in emergency medicine was the best avenue for combining my love for serving marginalized communities and pursuing medicine. While in college, I had the unique opportunity to serve as a medical scribe for doctors in the ER of a small hospital in Chattanooga, Tennessee. There, I worked side by side with emergency medicine doctors, and I eagerly absorbed as much as possible about serving ill patients. I saw firsthand the inherent vulnerability that patients face in the ER and how the vulnerability is exacerbated by language, cultural, and educational barriers. I observed the ER's role in the community as the access point to healthcare for people from marginalized communities. And all while my desire to become an emergency medicine physician grew stronger by the day, I knew that being accepted to medical school as an undocumented student would be almost impossible. I spent endless nights drafting emails to numerous medical schools, inquiring whether my undocumented status would obstruct my dreams of becoming a doctor. Repeatedly, those conversations would end in disappointment. It seemed like my hopes of becoming a doctor were getting further out of reach. The DACA program changed everything and opened many new doors for me. Importantly, it allowed me to enroll at the Loyola University Chicago Stritch School of Medicine, where I eventually went on to graduate within the top third of my class. Fast forward to today, I am now less than 1 week away from completing a 3-year residency training program specializing in emergency medicine. And while DACA has been a lifeline, only a pathway to citizenship granted by Congress would allow me the ability to live free from fear, safe with the knowledge that I can continue to serve my community. As an ER doctor, I have taken care of patients at all stages of life, from delivering babies taking their first breath to providing comfort care measures for dying patients during their last moments of life. I trained during the height of a global pandemic, taking care of a too-high to count number of critically ill COVID-19 patients, all while fearing the possibility of deportation because the previous administration was working relentlessly to dismantle DACA. I know that no protections are truly permanent, save for the ones provided by legislation, which only you all have the power to grant. I'm honored to serve my community during this pandemic and to help save lives when our country has collectively experienced great loss, even as I face my own uncertain future. And while it is true that most dreamers are not doctors, we all contribute to this country in our own special way. America is our home, and on behalf of the millions of dreamers living in the U.S., I ask that we be allowed to give back to our home permanently after being allowed to earn citizenship. I've been offered a position as an attending doctor in a hospital in Illinois where I will continue to serve the American people. While I know I'll work my hardest every day, only a pathway to citizenship will allow me to serve fully and continue my career as an ER doctor. I encourage the members of this committee to help ensure that young people like me who have built our lives here can contribute fully to the communities we know and love by passing a pathway to citizenship. Thank you again for allowing me to share my story with you today.
Thank you, Dr. Bernell. I'm going to take the privilege of the chair for just one moment and salute Loyola University in Chicago. With their School of Medicine, they were the first medical school in the United States to open competition to DACA recipients. There was no quota, no guarantees. You were just in the running with all the other applicants. And I believe over 30 were accepted at this school, and you're, of course, one of the best and most successful graduates. I wanted to give Loyola a shout out for that opportunity they gave you and so many others. Our next witness is Mr. Joseph Edlow.
Chairman Durbin, Ranking Member Grassley, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to present testimony on H.R. 6, the American Promise and Dream Act of 2021. Before we discuss the bill, it is imperative to begin with the current landscape. We have an unmitigated disaster at the southern border that threatens the integrity of the U.S. immigration system. With border apprehensions rising, inconsistency in the processing of aliens arriving at the border, and the administration taking actions in contravention of U.S. immigration laws, we are at great risk of the entire immigration system failing. So far in this fiscal year, almost 930,000 aliens have been encountered by U.S. Customs and Border Protection, CBP, over 633,000 of whom were encountered from February through May of 2021. With 4 months left in the fiscal year, this country is on track to see a record number of apprehensions along the southwest border. And these are just the numbers we know. It is estimated that at least another 40,000 people per month cross illegally and are not apprehended. Apprehensions of aliens with criminal convictions has increased significantly in this fiscal year as well. In the first 8 months of this fiscal year, Border Patrol has encountered over 6,900 aliens with criminal convictions, more than twice as many as in all of fiscal year 2020. Make no mistake, this is a humanitarian crisis, as everyone who makes this journey, from adults to families to unaccompanied minors, are putting their lives at risk while relying on smugglers often associated with cartels and other criminal organizations. As smugglers get bolder, the trip gets more arduous and perilous. Accordingly, Border Patrol has seen an uptick in life-saving efforts this fiscal year. Through May, agents at the southwest border have performed almost 6,900 search and rescues, eclipsing the totals for all of fiscal year 2020 and fiscal year 2019. As the Department of Homeland Security continues to make its own rules and ignore the statutory and regulatory mechanisms and procedures provided under law, the magnet drawing migrants to the United States grows exponentially. President Biden's DHS has waged war on immigration enforcement. It has ended successfully implemented programs such as the Migrant Protection Protocols, attempted to halt deportations, limited ICE enforcement priorities under the guises of limited resources and prosecutorial discretion, and has disregarded expedited removal and released thousands of aliens into the interior of the country in the vain hope that they will report to ICE at a later date. In short, the president has opened the borders. It is a constitutional crisis when the president abandons a core function of the executive branch and allows lawlessness and invasion along our borders. Congress must focus on the root cause of this surge. The Senate should be focusing on undoing the Biden border crisis and securing our borders. It must ensure that the law is being followed and that the executive branch is enforcing the law as it is written and not merely by executive and departmental memos. It must then address the other pull factors, such as the Flores Settlement Agreement and the disparate treatment of unaccompanied minors under the Trafficking Victims Reauthorization Act. The haunting images that we have seen over the past few months at the border will only get worse and more frequent unless the United States makes clear that disregard for our laws and our borders will simply not be tolerated. One of the largest pull factors is the continued promise of amnesty. Today's hearing on H.R. 6 is an advertisement for that promise and ultimately will make the crisis worse. The bill is bad policy and will propagate hopes of amnesty for generations yet to come. Among H.R. 6's many problems are that the bill would overwhelm USCIS resources, create blanket waivers for criminal aliens, invite fraud through low standards of proof, impose stringent and unnecessary confidentiality requirements on DHS, and ultimately overwhelm many of our federal district courts. H.R. 6 is simply the wrong bill at the wrong time. It will exacerbate the crisis along the southern border and, if passed, will serve as an impetus for any foreign national with no legal right to enter or remain in the United States to flagrantly disregard the law while they await their turn for amnesty down the road. Thank you for the opportunity to appear today, and I look forward to your questions.
Mr. Leon Rodriguez.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, Chairman, Ranking Member Grassley, members of the committee. As I sit here before you today, I can't help but recall my confirmation hearing as USCIS Director now more than 7 years ago. I remember pretty much every question that Senator Grassley asked, every question that Senator Durbin asked, and every question that Senator Feinstein asked. Even though those questions were difficult questions from both sides of the aisle and challenging to answer, that day for me was one of the joyous days of my life. Because as the child of refugees from Cuba who was born just a month after they had fled that dictatorship, it was in many respects a miracle for me to be here. In fact, the vagaries of U.S. law could easily have meant that I would have grown up in that dictatorship rather than in freedom here in the U.S. I remember the topic we were talking about that day 7 years ago was pretty much the same topic we're talking about today. We were talking about the southern border, we were talking about DACA, we were talking about the DREAM Act. I wasn't surprised to hear Senator Durbin early this morning cite to a version of the DREAM Act being introduced 20 years ago. In other words, we have been trying to tackle this issue through separate legislation dealing with the plight of the undocumented, as well as in comprehensive immigration reform packages, one during President Bush's administration and another during President Obama's administration. I think we've reached the point where we need to simply get this done. And if we look at the history, the bar has always moved. It has always been the wrong time, the wrong formula. I think we've run out of time. And we've run out of time for the simple reason that the cost of not finding a pathway for wonderful individuals like Dr. Bernell, like Mr. Pontieux, is unacceptable to the American people. For them to live at the mercy of a biannual DACA renewals, and for us to be at the mercy of not, as Senator Padilla suggested, be able to fully benefit as a country from their skills, is an unaccepted reality. It is one of the many criticisms I've heard of the DREAM Act, of DACA, and in the positions that Democrats have taken those acts, that we only lift up the cases like Dr. Bernell's and Mr. Pontieux, the doctors, the lawyers, the nurses, the teachers. But the fact, if you look at the DACA population, 89% are employed in and contributing to our economy. Thousands of them are going to school. They are doing exactly the kinds of things that we would want them to do. They are, with some exceptions, law-abiding. The way the DACA program has been administered is in many respects the blueprint and the test case for how this DREAM Act would be administered, and has resulted in a population that, on the whole, has been a remarkably law-abiding and productive population whose contributions could only be that much greater if this act passes. Now, I have to very specifically respond to the proposition that the fate of the Dreamers needs to be linked to our solution to what's going on the border. And the idea, and I agree with my colleague, Mr. Edlow, we do need to address the root causes. The root causes are the desperation of the people coming to our borders. They are the result of coming from countries that boast the first, second, and fifth highest homicide rates in the world. There is nothing that we will do that will stop that migration, notwithstanding the exploitation by smugglers, notwithstanding whatever walls we built, unless those conditions that are driving them to migrate are addressed. In the meantime, though, we can't wait to solve the case of the Dreamers. It is one thing to treat people as pawns in larger political debates for 3 months, 5 months, 6 months. It's quite another for 20 years to have passed without a solution. What I love about our country is that we are a country that fixes things, solves things, and makes them better. The time has come to do exactly that.
Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez. Ms. Root?
I don't think it's going on. Can you hear me? Okay. Chairman Durbin, Ranking Member Grassley, and distinguished members of committee, thank you so much for inviting me to testify on this important topic today. I'm here to honor my daughter, Sarah, who was murdered by an illegal immigrant who was driving drunk on my daughter's graduation night. Sarah had just received her bachelor's in criminal investigations and a 4.0 the night she was killed by Edwin Mejia. Sarah was just starting to get to the best years of her life. She was taken way too soon because people failed to follow our laws, and the administration at the time failed to secure our borders. To date, justice has not been served for my daughter, and her killer remains on the loose. Sarah was my only daughter, and she made me want to be a better person because she was so kind, caring, loving. She put others before herself, and no matter how busy she was, and she was busy, she made time for family and friends. She was smart, worked hard. She treated people with kindness and had a great relationship with her only brother, my son, Scotty. She wanted to pursue a master's degree after graduating. My baby girl had dreams too. Sarah was a true dreamer, and her dreams were crushed because people believe they can enter our country illegally, carry out criminal acts without recourse, and because some members of Congress are determined to let them. As a parent, I sympathize with those who want a better life for their children. We would all do what it takes to make a better life for them. However, you have to understand that rewarding illegal behavior only means we get more of it. The DREAM Act is enacted into law would benefit people who are charged with crimes. It would legalize people in this country who have been convicted of violent crimes. This isn't about rewarding valedictorians, dreamers. Even the data shows criminals are getting to use this. Allow me to talk about a few problems with this House bill. This is a legalization bill for more than just children. There's no age limit. This is a legalization bill for criminals. Charges, even the most serious criminal offenses, are completely ignored. This bill allows illegal immigrants who have been deported from the United States previously to still apply. This bill protects people who simply apply by giving them safe harbor to remain in the United States while their application is pending. This committee needs to urgently consider bills like Sarah's Law. This bill, in honor of my daughter, would require the government to detain someone who entered the country illegally and is charged with a crime resulting in death or serious bodily injury. I thank those who have sponsored this bill, including my home state senators, Senator Grassley, Senator Ernst, and then our neighboring state of Nebraska, Senator Sass, and Senator Fisher. Another key provision of Sarah's Law, which is missing from the DREAM Act, would ensure that there is an office for the American people devoted to helping them when they are harmed or affected by the actions of an illegal immigrant. An office that does this, the Victims of Immigration Crime Engagement, or VOICE, was established by the Trump administration, and without it, many families like mine would not find answers or be able to seek justice. This office has helped many families, and it appears that the Biden administration wants to dismantle it. In fact, last week, they changed the name of the office and vowed to help illegal immigrants who claim to be victims to gain access to support services, diminishing its sole mission of helping Americans. The administration has also removed the Voices Office Most Wanted list, which Edwin Mejia, the killer of my daughter, is on. It is no longer on their website. I urge you all to make the Voice Office stronger. It's very important to the American people and important to families that have nowhere to turn. Put American families first. Give other mothers and dads an avenue to get answers. Today, there is no trust in our federal government to carry out our laws. Let me close by saying that it has been 5 years and almost 5 months since we lost Sarah. The pain doesn't go away. Every day I grieve her loss. I hope none of you ever have to endure what I have. I know people come here to live a better life, to live out their dreams. My family, like many American families, holds no ill will toward people who desire the American dream. But there have to be limits and boundaries. People need to be vetted, and they have to be deported when not eligible for immigration benefits. We cannot forget that our laws are intended to keep us safe, and this legislation does not do that. It rewards the illegal behavior that my daughter's killer carried out. It excuses their criminal history and does not make America better. Thank you for allowing me to testify and share my daughter's story.
Thank you, Ms. Root. Mr. Pontieu?
Good morning, Senators. I would like to start by thanking Senator and Chair of the Judiciary Committee, Dick Durbin, and his phenomenal staff for your leadership and this opportunity. I would like to thank and great ranking member Senator Chuck Grassley and the other members of this important committee. My name is Roni Pontieu. I'm a Haitian immigrant, a worker with temporary protected status, a registered nurse and essential worker during COVID-19. I'm also a member of Family Action Network Movement, FAM. I would like to thank the Almighty for protecting me during the pandemic period. I would also like to send some words of comfort to those who lost their loved ones, a family member or friend. I work at Jackson Memorial Hospital COVID-19 Battleground, where I save lives every day. I've been here for 22 years now, since 1999. And since 2006, I've been a nurse. I'm currently working for Jackson Memorial Hospital in a unit specialized for COVID-19. I put my life in danger and on the line to save American lives. Every day, I'm exposed to COVID-19 in order to save other people's lives. Many TPS holders are healthcare providers. I'm one of them. I put my life on the line every day to save American lives. And I'm asking the U.S. government to permit me to remain here with permanent residency. I came to the U.S. 22 years ago with my wife, Marjorie Pontieu, and we have established our lives here. I was granted temporary protected status, TPS, by immigration officials when the earthquake left Haiti in shambles a decade ago. My wife and I have had 2 U.S.-born children, Christopher Pontieu and Ronid Christina Pontieu. We put ourselves through nursing school and bought a house in Miami-Dade. My son Christopher is an E4 specialist in the U.S. Army. Christina is a young leader at FAM. She's the co-chair of CFAR, Children for Family Reunification. My family risked their lives for this country. We have served this country and feel that we are Americans, but our immigration status has remained temporary. Given the contribution of TPS holders to this country, I respectfully urge the U.S. Senate to support the Dream and Promise Act that includes a pathway to permanency for immigrant youth and temporary protected status holders. Permanent status will allow TPS recipients to be more productive, continue paying more taxes. 30% of TPS holders are homeowners who add to our local economies through sales and property taxes. TPS holders play an active role in our children's lives. We attend the school meetings, recitals, and sports games. As of 2017, 273,000 children have parents with TPS status. Over 50,000 of these children live in Florida. If permanency is not granted, our children would face serious risk. These children would be forced to face separation from their parents or be forced to relocate to a country that is foreign to them. It would be extremely difficult for me and my family if I were to be forced to leave after 20 years of living in the United States and return to a country in shambles. Not only am I thinking daily about saving lives and taking care of my family, but in addition to that, I have to think about the possibility of leaving the United States eventually if I am not granted permanent status. We believe in your compassion. We believe in your understanding. We believe in your good judgment. And more importantly, we believe in your leadership. We believe you will make the Dream and Promise Act a reality. More than 300,000 TPS holders are waiting. More than 270,000 US-born children are waiting. Let's work together, Democrats and Republicans, to have immigration reform that will change the lives of millions. TPS recipients will keep their ends of the bargain by working hard, paying taxes, contributing to build the social, economic, and political fabric of this great nation. May God bless you. May God bless America. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pontieu. And let me also thank your family and especially your son, who is serving the American people in the U.S. military. We thank you very much for all of your presence today. And let me say, Ms. Root, it breaks my heart to hear Sarah's story. I'm sorry for the loss that you and your family have suffered as a result of that. I strongly support any efforts of law enforcement to locate the person responsible and to bring them to justice. I want to address one issue that you mentioned, and Mr. Edlow mentioned as well, and that is the provisions in the law related to past criminal behavior. Dangerous criminals are not eligible for status under the Dream and Promise Act. In fact, all of the bars that apply to immigration and naturalization automatically apply to anyone who's seeking to become a citizen under the Dream and Promise Act. It also bars individuals who are guilty of any felony, any 3 misdemeanors, or any crime of domestic violence. Now, I will readily concede that in 20 years and 20 at least different versions of this bill, there have been a lot of different definitions. But that is the standard of H.R. 6 that we are considering today. The notion that somehow, as Mr. Edlow said, we are going to give amnesty to criminal aliens couldn't be further from the truth. I'm sorry that you said that in the record because it doesn't reflect the reality of this bill. And I might also say that to call Dr. Mejia and Mr. Pontieu somehow flagrant violators of the law is to ignore the obvious. Mr. Mejia had very little to say when his family decided to come to this country. Mr. Pontieu came here under extraordinary circumstances in his own country. They don't really fit in a definition of flagrant violators of the law, as I see it. And that's why the Daca population has been considered in a different context as others. In terms of the current situation at our southern border, as Mr. Rodriguez said, it is challenging, and I could certainly give a defense to what we face today. It's not the first challenge. And if our standard on changing any immigration law is that we must have perfect compliance of all other laws, we'll never do anything. I think that would be a mistake. Personally, I support comprehensive immigration reform. Join the Gang of Eight, put the bill to the floor, it passed the Senate. I believe we should consider the fact that our immigration system is broken at this point. And the fact is, it didn't pass the House of Representatives. It did not become law. In terms of where we go from here, I've accepted Senator Cornyn's invitation, rather than challenge, I'll call it, to act on the southern border as part of any conversation that we have about any aspect of immigration. I think that is a good faith effort to try to find some common ground on a very challenging situation. Dr. Mejia, before we go any further, have you run into obstacles in terms of your medical licensure and such because of your undocumented status?
Thankfully, I have not. In the state of Illinois, I have not. But I'm sure that I would run into issues if I wanted to expand my medical license to other states in the United States.
So it's state by state in terms of your status.
That is correct.
And you, thank goodness, are going to continue to practice in the state of Illinois? Yes.
Yes.
Well, that is good news. Mr. Rodriguez, you've heard the testimony of Mr. Edlow and others about the situation with those with criminal status. I can't recall a version of the DREAM Act or DACA that has not included a bar to those who are guilty of criminal misconduct.
That is correct from my understanding as well, and I think your point that the existing inadmissibilities that run across all of immigration law will continue to apply here as well. Those are structured specifically to exclude felons, serious criminals, even in many cases, those who've only committed one misdemeanor.
That is the case. With TPS, I believe that is exactly the case. The TPS holders, they make ineligible anyone with one felony or more than one misdemeanor conviction under the bill. And there's no waiver for a crime that makes someone eligible for TPS included in the bill. So we maintain these standards as we must. And if we expect any bipartisan support for this bill, we're going to have to watch that very carefully. I'm sure that's an important consideration. Senator Grassley?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to all of you for your testimony. I'm going to start with Ms. Root. I know in your testimony that you discussed the voice office established during the Trump administration. I was concerned to see that last Friday, this administration announced changes to the voice office that appear designed to dismantle it. Can you just describe in a little more detail how that office helped your family and other families that have lost loved ones to crimes committed by illegal immigrants and why it is important to maintain it?
As I said in my testimony, for me, it was a place I felt I could go and get answers. You know, again, I'm grateful for the state that I live in because I had a lot of support from my senators and my congressmen. However, if I did not have that support, it was nice to have the voice office to call, get any updates on anything dealing with Edwin Mejia. And other families that I know that use the voice office, they felt the same way. It was nice to have a contact that would direct them in what they needed to do or help them through the weeds, as we call it, because when you are mourning the loss of a loved one, you don't know where to turn, and there was nothing out there for us. And then once the voice office started, there was an avenue for us to go to and get answers and get the help we needed.
Mr. Edlow, in your testimony, you point out a number of facts about the DREAM Act and Promise Act that concern me, facts that are also relevant to the Senate counterpart, the DREAM Act. Could you comment on how these bills benefit those with criminal records and how very broad the criminality waivers are? After that, can you comment on how the eligibility provisions of these bills are so different that the eligibility parameters of the DACA program, specifically when it comes to issues such as age cutoffs and maximum ages? Isn't it true that these bills go far beyond the kids that we so often hear about?
Thank you, Senator. Let's start with the criminality. So I appreciate Senator Durbin's comments, but let me correct a couple things there. First of all, in terms of dangerous criminals, we're not talking about dangerous criminals under this bill. We're talking specifically misdemeanors, felonies, and there are plenty of misdemeanor convictions that would be someone that I think we would all consider to be dangerous. Drunk drivers, as Ms. Root has testified about, would be dangerous, and yet that's a misdemeanor. And they're certainly potentially eligible for relief under this bill. Same thing with potentially a misdemeanor child sex offense. That is something in certain states that would give rise to a misdemeanor conviction that, again, somebody would then be eligible. The waivers that we see here excuse behavior for things that we've always found to be inadmissible, including crimes involving moral turpitude, commercialized vice, and even misdemeanor convictions that would involve smuggling, drug smuggling, and prostitution. But in terms of the term felony, definitions do matter. And in this bill, that we see a definition of felony to be more than 365 days. Now, certain states have a different definition of felony. For example, in California, you could have a felony conviction for 364 days. So that was somebody who would be convicted of a felony under state law, but would not be considered a felon under this definition. Additionally, the expungements that are allowed under this bill would include expungements for vacatures for any reason, including for rehabilitative purposes to get relief under this bill. That is new. That is something that is completely outside the scope of what we've normally seen in immigration law, where typically a vacature for that purpose is not appropriate. In terms of the Daca eligibility, very quickly, Senator, you're of course correct. We have no age cutoff here, so anyone who has been here for 4 years as of the 1st of January, who previously entered when they were 18, is eligible for this. Under Daca, it's 16, and they would have to have been here by June of 2012. That's certainly a 5.5-year gap that we add additional people in. Additionally, in terms of the lack of an age cutoff, your example is absolutely accurate. Somebody who entered years and years ago and then even potentially went home, as long as they entered initially when they were 18, they could be 70, 80 years old now, entered 4 years ago, and they're going to be eligible under this. So it's a lot larger population than just the Dreamers.
Mike, your time's up. I'll have some questions for answer in writing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Leahy.
Thank you very much, and I would just want to take a moment to compliment Senator Durbin, who has fought on this issue for years and has been really the clearest and best voice in the U.S. Senate on the issue of Dreamers. And, you know, we're a nation of immigrants. It becomes almost a cliche, but we are. My parents-in-law immigrated to this country. My wife was born here, and we've been married now for 59 years. My grandparents, maternal grandparents, immigrated to this country, and my mother was born here, and I still have relatives in Italy that I meet often. So it's important that we're having this. And it's important to note that everybody, or some seem to be talking about everything except Dreamers, the reason for this. Maybe that's because they know the majority of Americans, and that includes almost 70% of 2016 voters who supported Donald Trump, believe that Dreamers deserve to live and work legally in the United States. Certainly I do. I think Americans who believe in equal opportunity for DACA recipients, and that is the majority of Americans, would be dismayed to learn that Dreamers are currently banned from working in the federal government. So while Dreamers bring their considerable talents to virtually every other U.S. employer, including Fortune 500 companies, including state and local governments, as in my state, they're shut out from working as federal public servants in the country they love. Mr. Rodriguez, it makes no sense that every other employer in the country can benefit from Dreamers' talents and skills except the federal government. Do you agree with that? And if so, why?
Yeah, I have to say that is an issue that I think requires some careful study. Many positions throughout the federal government actually require U.S. citizenship as a prerequisite of admission. So I simply lack the expertise to make a representation today on that point.
There are some that positions in the federal government that require very specific things, certain security clearances and everything else. This is blanket. That every employer in this country can hire Dreamers except the federal government. Does that seem a little bit weird?
I certainly think a lot of potentially helpful talent is being lost by the federal government, probably in places where it could be used. But again, I would be hesitant to make a sweeping statement about how citizenship status and immigration status should be applied by the federal government without having.
Well, the reason I say this, we're seeing, and all of us have seen this, the federal government experiencing a very serious brain drain. I look at a March 2021 report by the House Science Committee. There's been a concerning decline in our federal scientific workforce at agencies that are in the front line of keeping America competitive or trying to keep America globally competitive. But there are thousands of Dreamers with undergraduate STEM degrees, pursuing advanced STEM degrees, who would jump at the opportunity to use their skills in service to America to help fill that gap that we acknowledge exists. As you know, the Senate just passed an overwhelmingly bipartisan bill, Democrats and Republicans alike voting for it, to improve America's competitiveness against global adversaries. Do you think that allowing Dreamers to work in our federal government would help bolster America's global competitiveness, something that both parties have voted for?
I have no reason to think otherwise. I have met, and particularly during my time as USCIS director, but even after in the community where I lived, literally hundreds of Dreamers doing all kinds of things: doctors, nurses, investment bankers, lawyers, teachers, HVAC technicians, all of whom I think are people who could contribute in every part of our society. So I have no problem with that idea.
Well, I'll simply close with this. I think of, this country almost becomes a cliche. This country built on immigrants. But I think of, we all go to swearing in ceremonies of new citizens. And I think of one where a federal judge in our state spoke at one. He had had a blood clot in his brain, came within a very short time of dying. He was on the operating table. The physician successfully operated on him and saved his life. As he said, when he woke up, he realized a number of years before he had given the oath of citizenship to the doctor that saved his life. Let's start opening our doors. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cornyn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is it Dr. Mejia?
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you, Doctor. What year did you apply for a deferred action?
I applied the year that, as soon as it was available to me.
Okay. And there's no question that you've made incredible contributions to our country as an emergency room physician, and I think the reason you're here is because you're an exemplary of the type of young person who's applied for and received DACA, whose life has been cast into uncertainty because of the fact that this has not been something that actually resulted from congressional action and consensus building. And I personally support trying to provide a permanent solution for people like you. I think you heard me say that there's a number of different iterations of the DREAM Act and DACA, starting with the original DACA, which now has 640 active individuals. The bill before us today would provide a pathway to citizenship for 4.4 million people. If it is politically unlikely for us to be able to pass something like the American Dream and Promise Act, which I believe it is impractical and unlikely to happen, would you support Congress passing a bill that would provide relief for a smaller population that could be agreed on by Republicans and Democrats alike, say the 640,000 active DACA recipients?
So I can only speak on behalf of my personal experiences, and I've known, I personally have watched the DREAM Act throughout the years from the very beginning, and I remember watching C-SPAN as a high schooler when the DREAM Act was first being talked about and discussed on the Senate floor and in Congress. Personally, I would support such legislation if it meant a permanent solution for me and all the other DACA recipients currently, because it's been many years, and frankly, we're all tired of waiting and having our life up in the air. I think we're ready for a permanent solution.
Well, as you probably heard me mention as well, there's a pending court case in the Southern District of Texas which could result in a permanent injunction against the DACA program because of legal problems associated with the original action. And so I think that should give all of us a sense of urgency. As many people have said earlier, Senator Durbin has championed this issue for many, many years. What's different today is that Chairman Durbin is chairman of the Judiciary Committee, and Senator Schumer is the floor leader, the majority leader of the United States Senate. If Senator Durbin wanted to mark up a bill in this committee, he could do it and he wouldn't have to ask permission of anybody. And then the Judiciary Committee could work its will. If we were able to report a bill, then Senator Schumer could schedule it for floor action. So I think we've been talking about this issue for as long as I've been in the Senate and trying to solve a very complex issue, an emotional issue for many, which is immigration reform. But I think for me, I think starting with the original DACA recipients, that would be a good place to start. We wouldn't have to stop the discussion beyond that, but Senator Durbin could put that bill here before the committee. We could mark it up. Senators could offer amendments, and then once it was received a majority of support, it could go to the Senate floor for action. I think what we need is action and less discussion, which seems to continue without end. Mr. Edlow, I wanted to ask you, you made a statement that we could well see the failure of our immigration system completely unless the situation at the border that's currently occurring, this surge of humanity, 180,000 new migrants just last month. The cartels and human smugglers have figured out our immigration laws and how to exploit the vulnerabilities and overwhelm our capacity to deal with them. Fully 40% of the Border Patrol are off the front lines because they're taking care of children. But particularly with Title 42, the public health title, expiring on June the 21st, could you explain to the committee what you think the consequences would be if there's not some other plan put in place when the Title 42 expires?
Senator, without Title 42, there's going to be no way to remove people based on the public health crisis that we've seen. In terms of how many more migrants we're going to see coming to either the ports of entry or between the ports of entry, I couldn't tell you, but it will expand. It will expand exponentially. I would also note that in terms of the what the Border Patrol and what Office of Field Operations are seeing, they're seeing this increase because yes, we're at one point saying don't come to the country. But then at the same time, we're giving mixed messages as we've dismantled the interior enforcement and people are able to essentially move through the ports of entry as quickly as possible. No one is staying there. No one is being processed under expedited removal. They're just being released. And I think that is ultimately what the draw is going to continue to be. And yes, without Title 42 in place, it's just going to expand.
Senator Feinstein.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to concentrate my questions on unaccompanied children. I'm really very concerned about it. And in 2008, we passed the Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act. It includes legislation I authored to ensure unaccompanied children are transferred to Health and Human Services facilities consistent with their best interest while they await. Well, I'm told that today we have 17,000 children in custody. That is mind-blowing, candidly. I would like to know more about these 17,000 children. We may disagree over the best way to address their arrival, but they should be treated humanely at all times, placed with their parents or other appropriate adults as soon as possible. So, Mr. Rodriguez, would you begin with this 17,000 number and break it down for us as to what is happening today with children in custody, please?
So Senator, not having been in the government now for about 4.5 years and knowing most of what I know from reading the papers, I can only agree with the proposition that we do need to break down and understand why that population is what it is, what the component parts of that population are, and why it is that that population has not been moved out of a detention setting. That's horrifying by any definition.
Can anybody else respond on that question? 17,000 children, and we don't know where they are?
Senator, I'm sorry, we don't know where we know where they are.
Well, then perhaps you would tell us.
Well, Senator, of course, I'm no longer in the government either, and I was not with Health and Human Services. But when the children are put into Health and Human Services custody, they are then moved to sponsors, as you noted. My concern there is I don't know that the sponsors are always close family. There's no follow-up with those sponsors to make sure that these children are put into safe places. So there's a humanitarian crisis there. But going back to TVPRA, I think the treatment, the disparate treatment of children, unaccompanied minors, between those that can be quickly returned to countries, contiguous countries, and those that can't from other countries is really what is driving this, because we have to find a safe way to address that and a humane way to address that. And the best way would be to return them to their family if their family is back in their home countries, which we cannot do right now.
Well, this is an area that I have some interest in, and I would appreciate other members of the panel commenting that what actions would you recommend Congress take to better protect unaccompanied children in immigration custody? Anybody have any suggestions?
May I give you another suggestion, Senator?
Sure.
Okay. For those that are placed with sponsors, ensure that those sponsors are in fact their parents or their legal guardian, and ensure that either Health and Human Services or the Department of Homeland Security, whether it be HSI with ICE or somebody else, takes responsibility for ensuring that those children have been safely placed. We have seen far too many instances where children have been placed in homes and have been the victim of sexual abuse and other horrific crimes. We've got to make sure, but right now, there's no one in the federal government that's going to take responsibility for that role of making sure that they're okay. HHS says it's not them, and HSI, I don't think, thinks it's them either. So we've got to figure something out there.
Well, thank you for that. Mr. Chairman, this is an area that I've had a lot of interest in. What's happening with 17,000 unaccompanied children? Where are they? What is the oversight? In 2008, we passed a bill. It's called the Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act. It included legislation I authored to ensure that these unaccompanied children were transferred to Health and Human Services. I thought they would have a better plan to take care of them. I don't know what the plan is at this point of time, but I would like to know it. And so I would like to ask that the department give this committee exactly what the status is of these 17,000 children. And I am hopeful that this committee will follow up and see if we are doing the best we possibly can to see that they are in good and secure circumstances.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Durbin.
I share your concerns, Senator. We don't have a current representative of the administration on this panel, but we certainly should be doing our duty and oversight in this important area.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I too commit as chair of the subcommittee on immigration and your colleague from California to work with you to follow up with the appropriate agencies
Good.
to get you the information.
Good, thank you. Thank you very much.
Senator Lee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. In September of 2019, then presidential candidate Biden promised that should he be elected as president of the United States, there would be immediate surges at the border. He said, quote, "If you want to flee oppression, you should come." Given President Biden's open invitation while he was a presidential candidate, it's not at all surprising, in my view, that we have record-breaking surges at our southern border that are causing a full-blown crisis at the border. Since February, over 632,000 people, that is that we know of, embarked on an incredibly dangerous journey and have entered the country illegally with hope of eventual amnesty. I went to the border in March with nearly 24 of my colleagues, and I saw this crisis firsthand. And I saw it as one who had spent 2 years of my life living along the U.S.-Mexico border, and saw that the risks had gone up substantially since I had last visited. And what exactly are we here to do today? Well, the majority has scheduled a hearing not to address the crisis at the border, at least not in a way that would make it better or alleviate it, but rather to discuss amnesty. The amnesty proposal in this bill would ensure that this unprecedented crisis at our southern border continues indefinitely, in perpetuity, perhaps. What we should be discussing today is what can be done and what should be done to stop the border crisis that we now face, and to stop the abuse of women and children who embark along this perilous journey, and to stop the smugglers and the cartels from earning record-high profits from exploiting this crisis. Mr. Edlow, what's the difference, if you can explain it to us, between the I-95, the I-85 notice to report, which we're told that CBP currently is issuing to those crossing the border illegally? What's the difference between the I-85 notice to appear on the one hand and the mandatory notice to appear?
Thank you, Senator. So I believe it's the I-385 is the notice to report, and frankly, Senator, it's a new one on me in terms of seeing this being given with any regularity along the border. Essentially, what that document is telling, it's a document that says that the person has been encountered, and that when they get to where they're going, they, per that document, are supposed to report themselves, turn themselves in to ICE in whatever city, community that they're in. This is not the same thing as a notice to appear. A notice to appear is a statutory document that has all the elements are laid out in the Immigration Nationality Act that commences an immigration court proceeding. So it says how the person entered, it alleges certain facts about the situation, and then gives a charge of either inadmissibility or removability for the court to ultimately make a determination. It's essentially the civil immigration version of almost a little different, but kind of like an indictment. It gets the immigration court process moving. But the expanded use, we're seeing, I've heard numbers upwards of 30,000 plus notices to report that have been handed out along the border. This is not even catch and release. I mean, this is catch and release beyond anything we've seen. This is almost catch and welcome, so that people can then find where they're going. Senator Lankford spoke on the Senate floor, I believe it was back in March, and said that out of 24,000 people that he knew of that had received this notice to report, only about 1,800 had ever actually turned themselves into ICE when they got to where they were going.
So how will this bill that's likely to extend to include at least 3 million people, quite arguably more, how will that impact the crisis at our southern border? Will it end it? Will it slow it?
I think it exacerbates it. I think it adds to the crisis as more people will see that the comments, the promises that have been made by the current administration, by the Biden administration, are coming to fulfillment.
Does it contain any provisions that, any enforcement provisions that might deter future illegal immigration, or even that might deter people from voting illegally while they're here illegally?
Thank you for mentioning voting. Voting illegally is one of the factors that is easily waived in this bill. There's a specific waiver here for any alien that has come into this country and voted illegally.
Why would we want to do that?
I don't have any idea. We wouldn't want to do that, nor do we want to waive criminal activity that we're seeing in this bill.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Next, we have Senator Klobuchar virtually. Senator Klobuchar, are you still with us?
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Senator Padilla, for your great leadership and for doing this hearing. And also thank you, of course, to our chair. Minnesota is actually home to thousands and thousands of dreamers. We also have a really strong history of TPS people because Somalia was designated for TPS. We have the biggest number of Somalians in the country. We have fought for that to be extended for all of our, of course, TPS groups, both in my state and across the country. And like Dreamers, for many TPS and DED recipients, the U.S. is the only home they've ever known, and I'm a strong supporter of this bill. So along those lines, I just want to clear up one thing at the beginning, Mr. Rodriguez. Well, when we are talking about Dreamers and people with TPS and DED status, are we talking about people seeking asylum at the southern border by any means?
No, and actually I had meant to talk about that in my opening statement. No, those are distinct. While they are different kinds of humanitarian relief, we're talking about distinct pathways to that relief.
And would any of the recent arrivals after January 1st at the border be eligible for the pathway to citizenship provided by the American Dream and Promise Act?
No, they would not.
Okay. And is providing a pathway to citizenship to Dreamers and people with TPS and DED going to slow down the administration's efforts at the border to either reunite families or other things? Would that be a deterrent to some of the work that's being done there?
Not at all. In fact, I'm a former state and federal prosecutor. I was a prosecutor in Brooklyn, New York at the height of the crack epidemic. And I know that one thing we need to do in the law enforcement world is to prioritize where we're going to focus not only our prosecutorial efforts, but also our administrative resources and how we're going to focus those. And so part of what we're doing here is taking the focus away from people like Dr. Bernell and Mr. Pontieux and really focusing them on illegal border crossing and focusing them on criminal conduct and not places where those energies don't need to be.
Okay, very good. I wanted to just deter to something a little bit related here, the Conrad 30 program. I am the lead sponsor of that bill, but we also have Senator Collins, Rosen, Ernst, King, Thune, Merkley, Capito, Blunt, and I hope our colleagues will consider sponsoring it. This is the one that helps underserved areas, particularly rural areas, for doctors to complete their postgraduate medical training in the U.S. And practicing in the U.S. after they've completed that training, rather than having to leave the country for 2 years, which to me is just nuts, given that we need these doctors in the rural areas. And of course, there's other provisions that we're looking at for nurses and the like. Could you talk about why this is important, this program?
Yeah, actually, a significant part of my current law practice actually is with healthcare providers of different types. We do have shortages at many different levels of the healthcare industry. Not only shortages of doctors in certain places, which I think is what Conrad 30 is trying to address, but also other types of healthcare providers. Nurses in particular, thank you, Mr. Pontieux, is one particular area of shortage. So this is, I think, a very important step
Okay.
for
Thank you.
the American people.
Thank you, and thank you for that segue to Mr. Ponthia. Mr. Ponthia, your wife is also a nurse serving your community in Florida. Your 20-year-old son is in the Army. Your daughter is a middle school honors student. How has living with this constant uncertainty affected your family and maybe prevented you from making investments that you would normally have made?
Thank you, Senator, and thank you for the question. And I would like to say that after I finish my registered nurse license, I plan to go to the university to pursue a career to become a nurse practitioner. But because of this uncertainty, that's mean the possibility of being deported, that's hold me. I could not go further. I even went to the hospital because of high blood pressure, and I'm on medication at this time. Even I'm saving lives, I'm taking care of patients, but also I have to take care of myself because now I have high blood pressure. So if you vote yes for this bill, I already registered to go to the university to pursue this career, to go for a nurse practitioner. I would like to become a nurse practitioner to serve this country because I feel that this is my calling. Even sometimes nurses are calling sick because they are afraid of the COVID. I'm always there, and I pray God to help me, not only to give the medication to take care of the patient, but to save their lives.
Thank you.
So now I will be able with this bill continue to go to school for a higher education and be able to take care of my family. Thank you.
Oh, so beautifully said. So beautifully said. I want to thank you, and also you, Mr. Mayor. I'll send to do a question on the record, but thank you both for being here and all of the witnesses. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Right now, we have a massive crisis at our southern border. My home state of Texas is bearing the brunt of this crisis. In the last month, CBP agents encountered 180,034 illegal immigrants crossing the border. That is a 674% increase from last May. That is stunning. We are on path to have over 2 million people cross the border illegally this year, the highest rate in 20 years. Where were we last year? Last year, we had the lowest rate of illegal immigration in 45 years. To my Democratic colleagues on this committee, I ask you, why haven't you gone down to the border? Joe Biden refuses to go to the border. Kamala Harris refuses to go to the border. Indeed, Kamala Harris seems to go everywhere else except our southern border. In 6 months, the Senate Judiciary Committee has not had a hearing on the crisis at the border. The approach of congressional Democrats is they don't want to know. The approach of President Biden and Vice President Harris is they don't want to know. When asked about it, Vice President Harris laughed and said, well, I haven't been to Europe either. Well, you know what? Joe Biden's in Europe right now. Maybe it's time for the person ostensibly in charge of the border from this administration to go to the border. And there's a reason Joe Biden doesn't want to go to the border. There's a reason Kamala Harris doesn't want to go to the border. There's a reason Senate Democrats on this committee don't want to go to the border. Because they know if they go to the border, the TV cameras will come with them, and they have no answer for this humanitarian crisis that is playing out. I challenge my colleagues on the committee, go look at the Biden cages. I've seen them, cage after cage after cage of little boys and little girls packed in, 1,700% capacity. COVID rate of positivity, 10%. Go look at the children that are paying the price for this failed immigration policy. And let's be clear, this crisis is the direct result of decisions made by Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. The very first week in office, Joe Biden immediately halted construction of the border wall. The very first week in office, Biden returned to the failed policy of catch and release. The very first week of office, Biden ripped to shreds the Remain in Mexico international agreement that had produced the lowest rate of illegal immigration in 45 years. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris caused this crisis, and congressional Democrats are perpetuating this crisis by hiding from it and keeping the policies that aren't working. And let's be clear, it is evident to anyone who looks at the problem what the cause is. Here's what the president of Guatemala said when Joe Biden took office, quote, "The very next day, the coyotes were here organizing groups of children to take them to the United States." That's the president of Guatemala. How about the president of Mexico? Here's what he said. He said that people see Biden, quote, as the migrant president, and so many feel that they're going to reach the United States. The message from Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to the traffickers, to the cartels, is the gates are open, come on in. The message is, give us your children, and I will tell you to my colleagues, look in the eyes of the little girls and little boys that are being physically abused, that are being sexually abused. This is not compassionate. This is not humane. Children are suffering because of your policies. And what do Senate Democrats do? Don't have a hearing on the crisis. Let's have a hearing on amnesty instead. The two bills here, one would grant amnesty to 3 million people, another would grant amnesty to 4.4 million people. Mr. Edlow, what message do the traffickers hear? What message do the people thinking about coming here illegally hear? What message do the parents getting ready to give their small children to traffickers to come to America here when Congress's message is, we will grant amnesty if you come? What's the effect of that message?
Now is the time to come. That is the message. Come across now. You have a good chance of being able to stay here, either under the radar and wait for the next amnesty, or you may even be able to benefit from this one because the availability for documentary requirements here include, at minimum, 2 affidavits from people. It's very easy. That invites fraud. It's so easy to get 2 affidavits to say that you've been here since before January 1st of this year, even if you haven't. So now is the time to come because nothing is going to happen. The enforcement mechanism of this country, in immigration enforcement, has been turned off. Prosecutorial discretion is ruling the day just like it did back in the Obama era, and the result is going to be the same with flagrant disregard for the law by criminal aliens and by those that want to exploit our laws now, like the smugglers. And that's why we see things even months ago, like horrific car accidents where close to 20 migrants were found in an SUV that was overturned, and many were killed and seriously injured. And that's because of these policies. There is absolutely no enforcement along the southern border. There's absolutely no enforcement except for a small little bit of what's left from ICE in the interior of this country. And immigration courts are being told to just go ahead and terminate cases if they don't meet the stringent requirements that they're needing to for priority. Because suddenly priority is based on limited resources that seemingly just turned up overnight. I don't understand what's going on right now because I can tell you, Senator, how it's supposed to be at the border. I can tell you how we're supposed to see people when they come over and what's supposed to happen under Section 235 of the Act. I have no idea what is going on. And I can tell you, Senator, whatever Border Patrol and ports of entries you visited, whatever Border Patrol sectors you visited, you are only seeing what's going on there. I don't know what's going on at the other ones. And I don't believe there's any consistency in the way that it's being administered.
Thank you. Senator Coons.
Thank you, Senator Padilla. I'd like to open by thanking Chairman Durbin for his 2 decades of tireless effort to focus our attention on dreamers, on those who've been brought here by their parents when they were children and who've contributed to our society over decades. There are literally millions of undocumented people who are working here, living here, paying taxes, serving in our military, or in the case of 2 of our witnesses today, as frontline essential workers who have contributed to saving lives in this pandemic. None of these people should have to live in the shadows of the only home they have ever known. It was in 2018 that I was honored to partner with the late Senator John McCain in introducing and advancing the Uniting and Securing America Act, which was a bipartisan proposal to pair the DREAM Act with common sense border security measures. And while that got just 52 votes on the floor of the Senate, I'm happy to be continuing conversations across the aisle now with Chair Durbin and Senators Graham and Cornyn, Tillis, and others in an attempt to try and find some compromise that can address these issues that have challenged us for decades. And while all of us have the ability to give stem winders and soliloquies to grow our viewers and supporters by attacking each other, I think our real challenge is to try and solve this problem. What I hear in Delaware and what I've heard across the country is that Americans would like us to actually solve the problem rather than swing wildly back and forth from one administration to the next in our tone, tenor, and actions with regards to immigration. I want to thank the witnesses today for sharing your relevant and inspiring perspectives, the challenges you've faced, or the work that you've done, or the service you're currently providing. And for those who are essential workers who testified today, I just want to thank you for being on the front lines of both advocating for TPS and Dreamers, but providing life-saving support for Americans with COVID-19. Dr. Mejia, if I might, I think it's important for folks watching to recognize the impact on your life of having an uncertain status, of lacking a permanent legal status here. You have two younger siblings who were born citizens, so you've got a personal experience around this, yet you continue to persist and engage and advance. And I'm so grateful to Loyola for providing you the opportunity at a medical education, and hopeful that your residency will soon conclude and lead to your position as a physician in Oak Lawn. Delaware State University, in my own home state, offers opportunity scholarships that Don Graham funded. More than 150 Dreamers have now attended and graduated from Delaware State University, including one, Indra Islis, who I got to know, who is also interested in following your footsteps as a medical professional. So in Delaware, we've seen the same sorts of things. I've heard from her, but I'd like to hear from you. What was the impact on your life of having uncertainty as you grew up and as you pursued your dream of becoming an emergency medical room physician?
Sure. Thank you for your question, Senator. So throughout my career, from, like I mentioned earlier, from the very beginning of me trying to attempt to get a driver's permit, that's when I first started noticing these barriers, and they were only more evident after that. From me applying to colleges, to me later on trying to see if I could even go to medical school, there was barrier after barrier. But somehow, whether it was the timeline of President Obama's Daca memorandum or my innate resiliency, somehow I found ways to overcome these barriers, and that's led to my success as an ER doctor, and will continue to lead to my success. There's no doubt that I've faced many barriers, and I will continue to face barriers, but as long as I'm given the opportunity to reapply for DACA every 2 years, I will continue to do so, because that just takes one thing away. It gives a little bit of security, although temporary. It does give a little bit of security to my career and everything I've faced.
Well, both you and Mr. Ponciu, who served as a nurse in a critically necessary role in an important hospital, have no permanent status, and that uncertainty, I think, must impact your service in your communities. I was proud to reintroduce this year, along with Senators Cornyn and Young and Collins, Leahy, and Durbin, the Healthcare Workforce Resilience Act to recapture 25,000 visas for nurses, 15,000 for doctors to help in the fight against COVID. Mr. Ponciu, could you also speak to the impact uncertainty has had on your career and what you've seen in terms of staffing shortages at the hospital where you serve, and what impact it might have if we were to provide some certainty and a path forward for medical professionals like nurses?
Yes, like I said earlier, as a healthcare provider, I've been facing death every day because of the COVID-19. And every day I go to work and I think that I have a responsibility to take care of patients to save lives. And it is my goal to save as many as possible. And with my temporary status, I always think that I'm limited, I cannot go further. But now, if the Senate want to vote to give their yes, I will be able not only to continue to work to help more patients, to save more lives, but I will be able to continue to pay taxes and to take care of my family. And this is what we want. We only want a chance. In 2006, I've been given a chance to go to school. I have financial aid, and I went to Sheridan Technical Center, where I get my practical nurse license. And since then, I was able to work. And after that, when I went to college, I was able to pay the tuition from my pocket because the school didn't have financial aid. So the same way I want the Senate to give those 200,000 people a chance to have a higher education and to continue to work to take care of their family and to stay in the United States.
Thank you. Thank you both for your testimony, and thank you to all the witnesses for participating in today's hearing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cotton.
Thank you. I have to say that we heard from Senator Coons terms that we often hear about children who are brought here through no fault of their own, who have never known another country. And that's why we need a solution like the House bill. The House bill would give a green card, though, to, say, an 18-year-old who arrived here in December. So that's very different than what Senator Coons portrayed or what the Democrats portray that this legislation would do. And that's why this hearing itself is so ill-advised. We have a crisis at the border. Illegal migrant flows that we haven't seen in a generation. The vice president gallivanted around Central America and Mexico last week looking for the root causes. I could have saved the taxpayer the travel expenses. The root causes are right up the street at 1600 Pennsylvania. It's Joe Biden and Kamala Harris running on an open borders campaign, that message being heard across the world, and hundreds of thousands of illegal aliens showing up at our border, not just from Mexico and Guatemala, but literally all across the world, to include Europe and Africa and Asia, because they know that our borders are open. And as Mr. Edlow testified earlier, the very fact that the United States Senate is having a hearing on granting a massive amnesty under these conditions will simply exacerbate this crisis. It will be used tonight by traffickers and smugglers to induce more desperate parents to send their children to our border, to encourage more people from around the world to make that very dangerous trip that will then put even more stress on our border and our law enforcement agencies, lead to more crime in this country, to lower wages and fewer jobs for the American people. So, Mr. Edlow, I'd like to ask a few more questions about this bill that my Democratic colleagues are promoting today. The so-called DREAM Act portion of this bill is falsely portrayed as being focused only on those children, as I mentioned earlier. But isn't it true that the bill allows green cards and citizenship for illegal aliens who entered the United States before January 1, 2021, as long as they were under 19?
Yes.
So in my hypothetical, an 18-year-old shows up at our border on December 31st and gets in. He is just as entitled to a green card under this legislation as some of the witnesses that we have here today and many other of the DACA program recipients who were, in fact, children when they came here and who have, in fact, lived in this country for decades. Seems to me like a very inequitable piece of legislation. Another question, Mr. Edlow. Let me give you another hypothetical. Let's suppose there's a Colombian family of three, a married couple and their 13-year-old adult son who also happens to be a gang member. They heard Joe Biden in the campaign last year. They also began to immigrate here, but they didn't quite make it by December 31st. They arrived in January. So technically, they're not eligible under this legislation. Isn't it true that all they have to do is find two other illegal aliens to attest in a document that they arrived here before January 1, and they also will be eligible for a green card.
They can certainly present that as the evidence, the
In your-
documentary evidence.
In your long history of enforcing our nation immigration laws, have you ever known illegal aliens to commit fraud in an effort to stay in our country?
Absolutely. When I was in immigration court, all the time.
Shocking. I can't believe that people who have risked everything and spent their life savings to come from places, again, not just Mexico, as far afield as Romania and Bangladesh, as have been encountered on our southern border in the last few months, would also be willing to lie on a piece of paper to a federal bureaucrat so they can stay here in this country. Mr. Edlow, isn't it also the case that President Obama's DACA program, even if you include all the expansions, never had more than about 1.5 million people eligible under its terms?
As it's already been said here, we had about 650,000 who are currently enrolled in DACA, and then looking at the Migration Policy Institute, they were estimating somewhere around 1.5 to 1.8 million would have been eligible, but that's an estimate. Yeah.
And this bill from the House would not make those 650 to 700,000 DACA recipients eligible alone. It wouldn't even make those 1.5 to 1.8 million DACA eligible persons covered. This bill would allow more than 4 million people to get an amnesty. Isn't that correct, Mr. Edlow?
That's correct, Senator. And I would also just quickly point out that the second part of the bill dealing with the Promise Act dealing with TPS right now under statute cannot be considered by the United States Senate. Statutory bar under INA 244H requires a supermajority of the Senate to allow any measure that would consider adjustments of status or permanent residency for temporary protective status holders to pass through that supermajority before it can even be considered or brought up on the floor of the Senate. So that part of the bill, in my opinion, can't even be brought up at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Edlow. One final point. Ms. Root, I would be remiss if I didn't express my deepest condolences and sympathy for your loss and your family's loss, and my great admiration for your courage in appearing here today and speaking out over the years for all of the thousands of American citizens who have been the victims of illegal alien crime. I'm very sorry.
Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this hearing. Outside of this building, outside of the bubble that is the United States Congress and its neighborhood, Dreamers are wildly popular. And the reason is that they have such a profoundly sympathetic story. It's the American story. As we all know, they were brought here at ages where they made no decision. They had no part in the decision to come here. English is usually the only language they know. America is the only country that they know, and they are part of this great nation, and they make it greater. The more Americans know about Dreamers, the more they believe that they should be given a chance at the American dream, which their situation represents. Dreamers and holders of TPS and deferred enforcement are, by and large, really remarkable people, not only for their accomplishments, which are impressive in their own right, but also because they've been able to attain those accomplishments and live day to day in the face of uncertainty and instability. And I have met countless numbers of them that face life with a bravery and strength that is awe-inspiring. I hear incredible stories from Dreamers and others all over Connecticut, stories like Evelyn Garcia, a 26-year-old who immigrated to Danbury, Connecticut at the age of 3, grew up undocumented, later received DACA status. Put simply, she embodies the American dream. Evelyn Garcia. In 2017, she graduated summa cum laude from Western Connecticut State University with a degree in biology and community health. And thanks to the benefits provided by DACA, Evelyn was able to pursue various rewarding academic and professional experiences, including prestigious fellowships at places like the Yale School of Medicine and the University of Pennsylvania Perelman School of Medicine. After college, she worked at a research lab at Harvard on a family-centered obesity prevention program for low-income immigrant families enrolled in Head Start in the greater Boston area. She's now a full-time student and presidential scholar at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, where she studied global health and infectious disease epidemiology. I could go on with other stories, and I have on the floor of the United States Senate, and I will do it again, just as Chairman Durbin has done, because the American Dream and the Promise Act will ensure that Evelyn and millions of others like her have the opportunity to continue their lives and make positive contributions to society here in the United States. And it is beyond me why we would do anything other than welcome Evelyn Garcia and her contemporaries and everyone like her with open arms to the United States. So let me ask you, Director Rodriguez, one thing I've heard from opponents of the Dream and Promise Act is that USCIS is not capable of effectively and safely implementing the legislation. You touch on this issue briefly in your testimony, but I'd like you to elaborate because it is an important issue. As a former director of USCIS, can the agency handle the practical challenge of implementing the American Dream and Promise Act?
So if you take the DACA experience, which I think, as I alluded in my oral testimony, was the test case, the pilot, in essence, for implementation of this act, that was, in fact, certainly during my tenure, and I believe since my tenure, one of the most cost-effective adjudication lines at USCIS. It paid for itself. The fees paid by the requesters of DACA status were sufficient to pay for the activity, including the very rigorous background checks. Now, it is the case that USCIS has experienced some pretty significant financial and operational challenges over roughly the last year and a half, maybe a little bit more. Those do need to be addressed. But I am confident, because I have tremendous confidence in the USCIS workforce, including its career managers, that they can remedy those challenges and be able to meet the challenge of implementing this bill.
Senator, may I respond to that?
If the chairman allows you to, my time has expired, but please go ahead.
As a more recent director of acting director of USCIS, I do not believe right now, without a significant appropriation, which, as you know, is not something that we typically get at USCIS, and with the ability to have at least a year and a half to hire additional adjudicators and to train those adjudicators to handle these types of applications, the agency would simply not be able to handle it. The backlogs continue to grow. Frankly, there's a front log now that continues to grow. We've got to address that first. USCIS must address that first before it could begin to tackle a new application. And I think at the end of the day, what
I hear you saying is that fiscally strangling the USCIS, as the Trump administration did, would have to be reversed.
Senator, you and I had conversations when we were having financial issues, and we've gone through why we had those financial issues when I was there, and it was nothing to do with what the Trump administration had done. It was COVID, and then it was other factors that came in, and I was able to successfully salvage that and to prevent a shutdown that would have frankly eviscerated our ability to handle any immigration immigration adjudication. So, we made the progress that we needed to, but we're still, that agency needs to continue to grow before it can, financially, before it can handle something like this. And I just don't think the resources are there in place right now to be able to handle that. And frankly, you're going to see your constituents who are calling you and calling all of you already about long backlog and wait times for adjudications of their petitions. You're going to see that grow exponentially if we add potentially 4.4 million new applications into the pipeline.
And as you know, when we spoke, I'm a strong supporter of resources necessary to do the job. And
absolutely, you and I had great conversations about this. Yes,
Senator, we have.
I want to look forward, provide the resources necessary to do the job here, because America deserves it.
Senator, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but there are other members we want to give a chance to speak, but I want to make one point since we've extended it into this conversation. Mr. Edlow, when you contacted members of the Judiciary Committee on behalf of the USCIS last May, you stated, at least to my office, that a previous Trump administration official made a decision to spend hundreds of millions of dollars from the USCIS rainy day fund at the agency, reducing the rainy day fund from $1 billion to $400 million. And you said you would have not made that same decision if you'd been at the agency at that time. So I wanted to put that in the record as part of the conversation about the funding of this agency.
May I respond to that, Senator?
I'm going to defer to the other senators who are waiting. Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm glad that we have the opportunity today to talk about what is happening on the border and to have a chance to look at and examine what is, I think, a humanitarian crisis. It is a national security crisis. It is a drug crisis. It's also, frankly, a moral crisis. When you see what these cartels are doing on our border, when you see the children being exploited and smuggled for profit by these cartels at the border, when you see the lies that these cartels are telling innocent people to get their money and bring them across the border, and when you see the effects of the drugs that are flowing across this border into every community of my state. I come from the state of Missouri. You can't visit a community in my state that is not, frankly, awash in drugs. From where? From across the border. Our border, it is a state of total crisis. And it is a crisis that is affecting every single person in my state and in this country. And I suggest to you, we have a moral obligation, and this administration has a moral obligation to address the crisis it has created at the border for children, for families, for American citizens. And I'm glad we get to talk about this. You know, the statistics tell the story. I mean, the number of family units crossing the border is up 4,143% from last May. 4,143%. That border crossing is not safe. It is not. The border is not open, and yet the Biden administration has sent the message that it is open. And it has effectively encouraged this illegal smuggling. It has encouraged this exploitation of children. It has encouraged the drug crisis we see with its policies. That's a hard truth, but it is the truth. And the American people are owed the truth. And the moral consequences of these policies have to be confronted and addressed and owned up to. And I'm afraid I can't support the legislation we're considering today because I think it goes in exactly the opposite direction. I think creating new loopholes for illegal immigrants who have criminal records, sending the message that more people ought to come here illegally while devaluing legal immigration is exactly the wrong way to go. So, Mr. Edlow, let me just ask you about some of the details of this bill. It allows individuals to receive permanent residency status regardless of age. It contains no commitments to reduce illegal immigration, no commitments to strengthen our border, and it seems to allow the federal government to waive restrictions on all sorts of criminal violations. Now, you have experience in administering our immigration laws. If we enact this legislation into law, what would be the practical effect of these criminal waiver provisions, for example?
Thank you, Senator. So in terms of the criminal waiver provisions, this bill has them in the full discretion of the Secretary to make determinations as to whether those waivers are appropriate and also to whether an individual should be deemed a public safety risk. But there are many exceptions to that. The ultimate effect would be a series of very severe crimes, including crimes that are considered aggravated felonies under our immigration laws, crimes of violence and theft offenses that would carry a year sentence at least, that would not be deemed felonies, or that could potentially not be deemed felonies under this act because this act defines felonies as a year or more, whereas certain states would, with a year or more, whereas that would only require a year sentence. I'm sorry, let me repeat that because more than a year, not a year or more, but more than a year. So 366 days, not 365. And that is a huge difference there. Additionally, looking at the Daca provisions from when Daca was initially introduced, there was no felonies or significant misdemeanors. And that is not here either. So pretty much most misdemeanors can be waived, especially if they're aged. Old misdemeanors, 1 or within 5 years or 2 within 10 years, can be waived, and that does have serious consequences in terms of the types of crime that we could see people then getting this done. Now, Senator, if I may, I think I misspoke briefly when I was answering Senator Grassley's questions about the Daca eligibility versus this. I said that the Daca enrollees had to be here by June of 2012. I misspoke. It was June of 2007 they have to be here, and they have to be under 31 in 2012. So I just wanted to correct that for the record.
Thanks for that. Back to the criminal violations, the waiver restrictions. Am I right in thinking the bottom line here that very serious criminal offenders could find a way under this legislation to obtain lawful residency status?
Well, I absolutely think so. And even if the waiver doesn't apply to them, the waivers are broad, but even if the waiver doesn't apply to them, the definition of expungement under this act, which would allow any expungement for any reason or any vacature of any reason to be the basis to allow consideration under this bill, would create a real problem. And that's very contrary to our understanding of immigration law, to the precedent that we have in certain matters that have been decided before the Board of Immigration Appeals.
Well, thank you for that. My time has expired. I just want to say in closing that I think what today's hearing in this legislation betrays is a pretty fundamental difference of opinion between us on these sides of the aisle about what our immigration system is about and should be trying to do. And I'll just say, Mr. Chairman, from my point of view, the reason I can't support this legislation is I think the point of our immigration system should be to encourage and facilitate legal, lawful immigration, should be to protect the American people, to prioritize American workers and American families, and to secure and protect our border. And I think this does exactly the opposite. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hirono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, there was a time when there was bipartisan agreement that our immigration system is broken, and in fact, in 2013, we actually worked on a bipartisan immigration bill that passed the Senate. So perhaps we'll be able to get there, but obviously that's not where we are now. I have a question for Dr. Mejia. I hope I'm pronouncing your last name correctly.
Yeah.
Your hard work and dedication to emergency medicine is impressive, and yes, you are one of the some 800,000 Daca participants, one of the exemplary people in the Daca program. But you don't have to be exemplary in order to get the protections that Daca affords. These are hundreds of thousands of people who were brought to this country as children who just want to have a chance at a good life in our country. But in the meantime, Dr. Mejia, you talked about what Daca meant to you. If the Daca program wasn't created, what do you imagine your life would be like right now?
Sure. Thank you for your question, Senator. Daca was a major life changer for me. Particularly, it allowed me to fund my education and fund my medical school degree to a degree that was not possible beforehand. If Daca was never implemented, I'm not exactly sure what my life would look like right now. All I can say is that whatever I had chosen to pursue, that I would have done a good job at it and done well at it and continue to contribute to the American society in whatever capacity I would be allowed to. Certainly, I think that becoming a doctor would have been close to impossible without DACA. And then even downstream, there's no way that I would have been employed as a doctor without DACA, even if I had been able to get a medical degree.
And of course, you would have faced deportation,
Of course.
especially after the DACA program was summarily ended. There were hundreds of thousands of you who faced deportation. This is for Mr. Ponthieu. The Trump administration tried to end the TPS designation for Haiti during declaring the country safe for people to return, despite it being declared a level 4 do not travel country by the State Department. Just last month, the Secretary Mayorkas announced a new 18-month TPS designation for Haiti due to serious security concerns, social unrest, an increase in human rights abuses, crippling poverty, and lack of basic resources, which are exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. What would have happened to you, to your family, had you been forced to return to Haiti?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. I appreciate that. And this is the situation. I've been here for 22 years, and I've built a life here. I have 2 US-born children that never know Haiti. My daughter is with me. She's always with me, coming to Washington, D.C., and she never know Haiti. And you know the situation in Haiti, the country is in shambles, and there's no way I can go back to Haiti with my kids to have a life. So in order for me to be here for them, like my daughter wants to become a lawyer, so she will need me to help her, to guide her, because if I go back to Haiti, it's going to be a disaster. So with the renewal of the TPS, that helped me to take care of my children, to take care of myself, my children, my family, and to continue to serve the community, to work as a nurse, as a healthcare provider, to save lives.
And clearly, this 18-month extension is critical to you and your family. For Mr. Rodriguez, last week, the U.S. Supreme Court held in Sanchez v. Mayorkas that TPS recipients who enter the country without inspection are generally not eligible to adjust status to a lawful permanent resident. This decision resolved a circuit court split, which means that TPS holders who are in this situation across the nation will not be able to adjust their status. H.R. 6 addresses this issue and will allow TPS holders to use existing pathways to citizenship. And of course, the process itself of going through and getting TPS status, even if they did not go through that process upon entry into our country, in my opinion, should have enabled them to be able to get citizenship. But some argue that TPS was always meant to be temporary. Can you talk about why it's important to give these TPS holders a path to a permanent status?
I think as I mentioned in my written testimony, many TPS recipients, when they first requested TPS, never imagined that the conditions that would enable them to return safely to their country would not come to pass, that years and years would pass before that was a realistic possibility. In that time, careers have been launched, families have been built, homes have been bought, contributions have been made to our economy. Very similar to the Dreamers, they are now part of the fabric of our society. And so I do believe that it makes sense. And I don't think, by the way, that the few circuits that were permitting adjustment based on TPS ended up having that much impact, because you still had to be qualified for a green card, either through marriage or through some other path. So there really weren't that many people who were able to take advantage of that construct. So I do think that what this bill is doing with TPS recipients is necessary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Kennedy.
Mr. Edlow, I'm pleased we're having this hearing today, but it just seems to me the timing is bad. The house is on fire, and we're discussing new tires for the tire truck. Does a tire truck need good tires? Sure. Is that important? Of course. But not when the house is on fire. I want to talk about the house fire. I've been to the border.
45? Okay, never mind. I'll go.
I used to have a beagle. His name was Roger. I loved Roger. I cried like a baby when he died. But Roger, like most beagles, was incorrigible. About every third day, he'd run away. And eventually he'd come home, and he liked to collect roadkill. And he'd bring that roadkill into my backyard and hide it under my back porch. And the border enforcement that I've seen looks like some of the roadkill that Roger kept hidden under my back porch. Why are we having a crisis now at the border in 1 minute?
It's the administration policies that we've seen since the first day after inauguration, with the first executive order to halt deportations, with executive action to destroy, I'm sorry, not executive order, but executive order to make things easier for immigration, with the Department of Homeland Security halting deportations, with ICE guidance to return to prosecutorial discretion where only certain types of offenses can be prosecuted, can be enforced and can be put into immigration court or set for removal, where we ignore the fact that there are over 1 million people in this country with final orders of removal, none of which seem to be a priority for.
Mr. Evelyn, let me interrupt you. I apologize. If we had the same policies in place today that we had on December 31st, 2020, in your considered judgment, would we be having this crisis?
No.
Did the Biden administration strike that? Let me try it another way. Did you meet with representatives of the Biden administration to talk about border security?
I can tell you that I had at least one meeting with the transition team, with Or Jadou, who was running the transition team, and I know that team met with many people at USCIS, every different department at USCIS, and same with other agencies within DHS.
Did the people, the good people on the Biden transition team express an interest in changing border policy?
I don't, based on my conversation with them, Senator, no. It was more just trying to understand what was going on and where things.
Well, did you and your colleagues explain to them what would happen if we changed border policy?
I did not, and that was not the questions that were being asked to me, but I know that others within the department did have that frank conversation with those team members.
So the members of the Biden transition team knew if they changed the border policies, we would have a crisis.
I think any change in border policy that is so extreme would result in this, and I think they had to have known that.
But they did it anyway.
Correct. Especially the withdrawal and the ending of the MPP, migrant protection protocols.
Why do you think they did it if they knew there was going to be a crisis? If they knew that people from all over the world were going to be able to walk into our country, we don't have the slightest idea who they are. Why do you think they would allow that to happen?
It could be several reasons. It could have been a tactic, a political tactic, to then come back and try to fix the border themselves. It could have also been the what we've seen time and time again, that Trump equals bad. So anything that the president would have done, the former president would have done, had to be overturned, no matter how successful and how important it was in maintaining order at the border. And that's what I see this as. President Trump did a phenomenal job of giving the right people the keys to make sure that we could address the crisis along the border, that we could make sure that enforcement was where it needed to be. And unfortunately, that was just derailed on January 20th.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Colleagues, in order of questioning here, it's my opportunity to ask a few questions before recognizing the next senator. I want to begin by commenting on what I thought was an original analogy of the House being on fire, but sadly we've heard it previously in the meeting of the Judiciary Subcommittee on Immigration. At the time, it was when the House is on fire, it's not time to start painting the house. Today, it's when the house is on fire, it's not time to buy tires for a truck. When I think the reality is when the house is on fire, let's not forget the people who are inside the house, including people inside the house who may be risking their own lives to save life and property, if we want to have that analogy. But let's get back to the actual topic of today's hearing. When the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or the DACA program, was first announced by President Obama 9 years ago today, he said that the program was not a path to citizenship or a permanent fix. It was a temporary stopgap, but would provide some relief and hope to talented young people while Congress would work on the permanent fix. DACA was rescinded by President Trump in 2017 and has been litigated in the courts for years. So far, has been largely upheld by the federal courts. Those are the facts. So my first question is for Mr. Rodriguez. You were part of the Obama administration when DACA was announced. Why do you think the Obama administration focused on this specific population, and why do you think the program has largely remained intact over the last 9 years, particularly in light of the legal challenges?
Yeah, I think members actually in this committee on both sides have alluded to the reason, and that is that it is a population that is viewed as blameless. They came here by whatever different means as children. And therefore, there is actually a broad consensus among the American people and among our political leadership that this is a population that deserved that relief. And for that reason, this was meant as a stopgap in two ways, actually, Senator. One is a stopgap for the DACA recipients themselves, but also as a stopgap in terms of addressing this population first, not saying that this would be the only population that would benefit from relief.
Thank you. Changing the topic slightly for the next question, I want to make reference to a 2018 article by the Military Times where they estimate that there's nearly 12,000 service members who have a spouse or family member at risk of deportation. This means that there's currently American troops who, in addition to carrying the heavy burden of protecting our nation and taking care of themselves in dangerous situations, have the additional worry that one of their family members may be deported when they come home. These are service members putting their lives on the line for our country, and yet we cannot provide for them the peace of mind that their families will be there intact when they get back. Now, the military prides itself on providing support for family members, for service members, and this seems like a pretty big oversight. So my question is for Mr. Pontieu. According to your written testimony, you have a United States citizen son who is currently serving in the U.S. Army. Can you just share with us how he may feel about you and your wife not having permanent status in the United States while he's on active duty?
His name is Christopher Pontieu, and he's a reserve in the U.S. Army. He just came from deployment. He was deployed for 10 months, and he feels that it's unjust. It's not fair that his family are facing deportation when he put his life on the line to protect the country. So I think we can change that. I cannot do anything, but you can change it and make it fair for the TPS holders and DACA recipients.
Okay. Thank you both, and thank you to all the witnesses. We now turn to Senator Tillis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here. You know, if somebody were watching this hearing right now on this specific bill, they may think that there are not willing members on both sides of the aisle to come up and address some of these problems. Along with Senator Durbin and Senator Padilla, I'm participating in a bipartisan working group trying to solve this problem. And if time allows, I'll get into some of that. But Ms. Root, I want to make sure that the record accurately reflects what you said. When you were referring to illegally present criminals, you weren't talking about the violation of crossing the border. You were talking about other egregious acts that occurred after that. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Yeah. I just wanted to be absolutely certain for the record because there seemed to be some confusion earlier on. Mr. Edlow, I also want to get down to what's really causing a fundamental problem. I voted for a path to citizenship, not only for the 600,000 plus who are already enrolled, but for those who are eligible under the Daca program, as have more than 40, almost 45 Republican members a couple of years ago. We favor a bill that has those provisions in it. But Mr. Edlow, when we look at the bill before us, the Dream and Promise Act, I am really concerned with the form of blanket waiver. I want to go back and talk about what that waiver would enable an administration to do. It would allow them to waive assault on a law enforcement officer, assault on a member of Congress, blackmail, bank robbery, and unlawful voting in a federal election. It would allow them to issue a waiver for persons who have violated state law that include assault, child abuse, child molestation, prostitution, certain weapons possession offenses, burglary, theft, sex abuse, sexual misconduct, public lewdness, and perjury, and gang membership. Because I've heard other people say, no, that waiver's not really in there. Am I misreading Section 3 of this bill?
I don't believe you are, Senator. That waiver is in there, and all of those crimes potentially could be waived.
Yeah, that's the concern. Because if you remove that, then you change the population and you get it back to the exemplary models that we have right here. Mr. Brontu, I've got a certain affinity for nurses. My daughter, who was pregnant with my second grandchild, was on the front lines last year before she had our baby, my grandbaby, back in August. When you, in your opening testimony, talked about permanence, are you asking for an amnesty or citizenship, or just some permanence and maybe some path in the future to where if you chose to pursue citizenship, you would have it? Are you just looking for permanence, not worrying about in any given day your temporary status could be removed?
So we asked for a permanent status.
Do you think that in providing you permanence that we should have a waiver that would allow somebody that's under the same protected status that you have, that's guilty of any of these crimes that I just delineated in the Dream and Promise Act? Do you think that they too should be given permanence?
I don't want to go there, but there's a Justice Department to do its job. I think they should do their job, but as for me and most of the TPS recipients, we are not criminals.
You deserve it, and you and your family deserve it. And
thank you, Senator.
I also thank your son for his service. There's over 820 people who are Daca eligible who are serving in the military. They deserve some permanence as well. Mr. Rodriguez, I have to say, you know how Congress works, and I have to say that we can't turn a blind eye towards the crisis at the border and only solve the permanence problem that some of the witnesses have legitimately testified here today. Vice President Harris has made a pledge of $130 million to Mexico to try and work on some of the systemic problems in Mexico to reduce future flows. That's roughly $1 per Mexican citizen. Every 9 days, the cartels make about $130 million through human trafficking across the border. Those same cartels are responsible for abandoning people on this side of the border. Over 7,000 life-saving rescues have occurred this year. And why are they doing that? Because then they can get the 300 or 400. This is something that's very important for those of y'all that we're trying to get to a good outcome. 300 or 400 gotaways, people who are trying to evade Border Patrol to get into this country. Thousands come in, 180,000 last month. They submit themselves to Border Patrol because they want to be processed. They know how the policy is going to favor them. They'll be released. But what do you think those 300 or 400, where the cartels set a pick, they send these children, men, women, and children over to engage Border Patrol so they can have 300 or 400 people cross this border every single day, evading arrest? Do you really think that they're likely to become a doctor or a nurse? Or are they likely coming here because they themselves are already criminals in their country of origin? 300 to 400 a day. So when you hear this conversation here, I'm about to wind up, Chair Padilla. When you hear this conversation, is we're trying to strike the balance between a fair outcome for you all and thousands, hundreds of thousands like you. But we also have an obligation to the American people to protect our borders and to protect our populations. And Ms. Root, I also want to mention, I'm on Sarah's Law. I'm a co-sponsor on that bill. We have an obligation to protect this nation because one of the reasons why people are fleeing here is they know when they get here they'll be protected. But if we continue to erode public safety, we can't do what is one of the most important things we can do as members of Congress. And I hope that we continue to work on a bipartisan basis to provide you all with some permanency, to reward you for your exemplary behavior, but at the same time understand our obligation to protect this country and to defend its borders. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to each of you for being here today. I appreciate your time. And I want to start with one question. It's a yes or no, so we'll just go right down the list. And is it Dr. Bernell? And you have a Memphis tie, and I appreciate knowing that. But here's my question to each of you. Do you support the rule of law in this country? Yes or no? Dr. Bernell, start with you.
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Rodriguez?
Yes.
Thank you. You know, we're here because we all support the rule of law. But what is frustrating, and you've heard it from my colleagues, there are hundreds of thousands of people that have come across our southern border since President Biden raised his hand and took the oath of office. There was 183,000 alone in the month of May. And this is not right. And those are individuals who are choosing to evade the rule of law. Because there is a right way and a wrong way to come to this country. And why in the world would we make any decision that encourages people to evade U.S. law? And so another yes or no. And Dr. Bernell, starting with you, should we as elected officials encourage people to break the rule of law in this country? Yes or no?
To simply answer your question, I would say
No. Yes or no? Yes or no?
no.
Okay.
No, Senator.
No, but I think it's a far more complex question that
No.
deserves a
Is
far
it
more
yes or no?
elaborated answer.
No.
Okay. See? And I agree with that. We should not take actions that are going to encourage people around the rule of law. Ms. Root, I want to come to you. My heart breaks for you. It honestly does. As a mom and a grandmother, I can only imagine the heartbreak you experience every single day. So it was Mr. Mejia that...
Mejia.
Mejia. Okay, there was a warrant out for his arrest prior to the accident, right?
Correct.
And do you remember what the warrant was regarding?
Failure to appear was what the warrant was for.
Okay. And how many days did he spend in jail after killing your daughter?
I want to say he was in jail 5 days, maybe, when he posted bond and fled.
And what was that bond amount?
It was $50,000, and he paid 10%, which was $5,000.
So, in other words, this is a guy who has a warrant out. Did he have a criminal record?
Prior misdemeanors.
Okay. So, a criminal record, there is a warrant, an outstanding warrant for his arrest, and he's in jail for 5 days and pays $5,000, and he's gone, and your daughter is still dead.
Correct.
That's right. Never coming home.
No. No.
And you
Separated
said in your
permanently.
testimony that she was a dreamer,
Yes.
that she had dreams.
She did.
Give me a couple of things that she wanted to do.
Well, like I
Did
said, she was going to go on for her master's. She had just graduated with a 4.0 in criminal investigations, and she had dreamed to, again, become a wife, have children, get her master's. Her telling what else she would have done that was cut too short, I'll never know.
That was her version of the American dream.
Correct.
And it all ended
Yes.
because someone who was illegally in the country, who had prior convictions with an outstanding warrant, took your daughter's life.
That is correct.
That to me is absolutely heartbreaking. In fiscal year 2020, ICE said that they account for 103,603 arrests. 90% of these illegal immigrants that were arrested, the 103,603, they had criminal convictions or pending criminal charges at the time of the arrest. This is why we are very concerned about this issue. I've spent a good bit of time talking to angel moms and to angel families and hearing their concerns about what has happened since the Daca program. And as Senator Cornyn mentioned to you all, this is something that was not legislative action. Mr. Chairman, I'll finish in just a second. This is an action, an executive memo. This is a program that got stood up on executive memo by President Obama. And, you know, while we know that there has been a push to find a way for people such as yourself, Dr. Bernell, to find a way to be legally recognized, we also know that any kind of blanket amnesty with a wide net would involve so many people who have come to this country with ill intent or with criminal convictions and have cut the lives of many American citizens short and deprived them and their families of the right to pursue their version of the American dream. I yield.
This concludes Senate questions from senators. And before some brief closing comments, I feel compelled to allow Mr. Rodriguez to briefly, emphasize briefly, respond to a statement, an accusation, frankly, we've heard from several of our colleagues here today that DACA serves as a magnet. Again, just briefly, can you give us, given your experience and observations, does DACA serve as a magnet?
I think you have to look at the propeller, not the magnet. And then when we're talking about the rule of law, the complete absence of rule of law in the Northern Triangles, the highest homicide rates on the planet are what's driving migration. So until rule of law in those countries is addressed, and they're not going to be able to do it without international support, we will. And by the way, these high levels of migration, except for last year, the COVID year, there were high levels of migration across the southern border, even during the Trump administration, even with all of the bellicose rhetoric of that administration. So the fact is that while those conditions exist in the Northern Triangle, we will continue to see people at our border.
Thank you. I want to thank all your witnesses for your participation in today's hearing. I hope this hearing, I have found it helpful in shedding light on the human impact of our broken immigration system. A lot of references have been made today about the quote-unquote situation at the southern border, where the reality is numbers are way down compared to just a couple of months ago. This hearing is in context of broader discussions and negotiations going on about immigration reform. If there's a question about whether or not Democrats are willing to discuss border security, let me answer it now. The answer is yes, as long as it's smart and driven by data and experience, and we know specifically at the ports of entry is where the vast majority of the security concerns are, and any border security elements of a single bill, multiple bills, should be driven by that. But let me be clear. The questions, concerns raised about people approaching the southern border today, tonight, or in recent months is a population very much separate and apart from Dreamers, TPS holders, and other long-term immigrant residents of this country who have been living here, have been working here, have been contributing to the economic success and resiliency of the country. That's why the Dream and Promise Act was approved by the United States House of Representatives on a bipartisan basis, because people across the aisle recognize that. I also want to make a quick comment about one of the questions or concerns, if I'm generous here, about the numbers are growing. Well, as we said repeatedly today, the DACA program was put in place 9 years ago. And when it was put in place, it did recognize folks that came through no fault of their own, children brought here by their parents. And so when the program was put in place, there was a sort of a look-back date set for people who had been here prior to a certain year. The reason the numbers change is because that year has changed, because 9 years later, Congress still hasn't done its job. And so we shouldn't be surprised that we're now talking about a larger number of people who still fit the same criteria established in DACA many years later, because the dynamic has continued, and also highlighting the distinction between folks who might have been eligible to apply for DACA versus those who actually did apply for DACA, given their courage, as we have, again, heard here today from our witnesses. So with that, I want to thank again all the witnesses for your participation and your testimony today, and for highlighting once again the urgency for Congress to act. And turn it back now to Chairman of the committee, Senator Durbin.
Chairman Padilla, it was an honor to have you preside over this hearing, and I thank the witnesses as well, and I will be very brief. If you were wondering at the introduction why this measure has been pending for 20 years and witnessed this hearing, you have some indication why. There clearly are differences of opinion on immigration policy. It is interesting that a nation of immigrants has such mixed feeling about the next immigrant to come into this country. It is pretty clear that some of my colleagues don't want to see that next immigrant, whoever it might be, though the fact is about 1 million people are legal immigrants to the United States each year. And still, when we talk about those eligible under DACA or the DREAM Act, there are people who are hesitant, clearly on this committee, for fear of sending a message to others that this is a welcoming nation. I think we can find justice for people who are eligible under TPS and the DREAM Act without suggesting that the door is open and anyone can come to this country without any kind of scrutiny whatsoever. Incidentally, we have faced serious challenges at the border since the beginning of this year. We are being tested by coyotes and others to see just how far our system will go and whether it will work. And I believe that's a very real challenge. I'm working on a bipartisan basis, Senator Padilla, Senator Cornyn, Senator Tillis, and others to put together a southern border security bill. We are not ducking the issue. We are addressing it directly, as we should. But I will say it's interesting when people here were referring to this border crisis, they talked about the thousands that were presenting themselves at the border. They didn't finish the thought. 74% of the individuals encountered at the border have been expelled. 74% have been expelled of the people who come to the border. So the Biden administration is up against large numbers, but they are clearly not welcoming and opening the door to everyone who presents themselves in this situation. Let me say a word, too, about criminal background. You cannot be in the DACA program except on a biennial basis going through a criminal investigation about yourself. And anything you have done to break the law disqualifies you from DACA. The suggestions have been wildly across the field here as to what DACA eligibility includes. From the beginning with the DREAM Act, we have always said that if you are guilty of serious criminal misconduct, you are ineligible for the DREAM Act and DACA. The definition has changed over the years, but for the bill that's before us now, H.R. 6, the so-called waivers that we've heard over and over again, the testimony back and forth, I commend to my colleagues the section, it's waivers for certain misdemeanors, not felonies. And in terms of the inability of one of our witnesses to figure out what a felony offense might be, I refer him to the definition section of the same bill that defines the term felony offense. It's already there. So we're going to be serious about this. If we can make this the law of the land, it's going to be clearly with the intention to make sure that our national security is never compromised, and secondly, to make sure that we have opportunities, not for people to sell drugs in this country, but for people like Dr. Bernell to prescribe them to save the lives of Americans, and Mr. Pontieu, and your work as well. And I also want to make a point, it's been made a couple times, it should be made again. Your son tells the story better than any testimony that can be given. The fact that he came as your son, an American citizen now, and turned quickly to volunteer for this country tells a great story of what we're here for today. We clearly have challenges and many more to come, but we know that we have work to be done. I ask that a number of statements be entered into the record from a wide variety of organizations supporting the bill before us today, and without objection, they will be so entered. Thanks again to the witnesses. Thank you all for being here. Regardless of your point of view, we welcome your participation in this, and I can assure you that the battle will continue. The committee stands adjourned.